Um, so I guess maybe we can get started. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the public workshop for the Zero-Emission Forklift Rulemaking. I'm David Chen. I'm the section manager here at the California Air Resources Board, and I'm overseeing the development of this regulatory proposal. As always, thank you for joining us. Your feedback is critical to this process, and we're extremely appreciative of the time and effort you have committed to participate in this workshop today. So before we get started, I'm just going to quickly introduce the CARB team. So on the call or on the meeting, we have the staff lead, Keith Roderick. We also have our lead on the cost analysis, Lori Berard, who has so graciously offered to give our presentation today. We also have Holmes Bassett and Marjorie Tomorrow on the line. They'll be helping with meeting logistics. And last but not least, my supervisor, Kim Horoy Rogowski, is on the line, and who I'll pass the baton to say a few words before we begin.
Hey,
Kim?
yeah, just want to thank you, David. I just want to echo David's thoughts that we really appreciate everyone's input and taking time to attend all these workshops and meet with us individually. We do think this will likely be our last public workshop before we put the staff report out and have our, formal proposal ready to present to our board. We do have some specific questions here, but we're still kind of working to refine the proposal. So we really hope folks will respond here. And again, if you don't want to respond in public, but you do have some thoughts, please feel free to reach out to us separately so we can have your input. Thanks.
Okay, Lori, why don't you take it away?
Okay, good morning. I'm Lori Berard. And before I begin, I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our webpage within a week or so following this meeting. This workshop is our 5th public meeting on the Zero-Emission Forklift Rulemaking. And as David mentioned, and Kim, we really do appreciate your interest and participation in this rulemaking process. Next slide, please. Okay, here's today's meeting agenda. I'd like to highlight that since staff last released draft regulatory language in July of 2022, staff has made numerous changes, and we'll go over those changes today. We'll also discuss the environmental analysis, and of course, we're very interested in getting your feedback. We'll stop for some questions and comments midway through the presentation, and then take your remaining questions and comments at the end. Next, please. You can obtain materials on our webpage, including this presentation, the meeting notice, draft regulatory language, and a recording of this meeting. You can find materials and recordings for previous public meetings as well. And you can navigate to our webpage by using the link that's shown here, or by going to CARB's main webpage and searching for the term forklift. Next, please. We want to hear from you and make this webinar as interactive as possible. You do have several options for asking questions. You can use Zoom's raise hand button in the webinar window. Staff will then unmute you, and then you can speak. Alternatively, you can type your question in Q&A in the webinar window. And for those of you who are joining via a conference call, you can press #2 to raise your hand. As mentioned, we'll take some comments and questions midway through the presentation and then also at the end. However, if you don't get an opportunity to ask your question or make your comment, please feel free to reach out to program staff following this meeting. Our contact information is provided at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. As I previously mentioned, this workshop will be our 5th public meeting for this rulemaking effort. We released modified draft regulatory language just last Friday, and it's available on our webpage. We're currently on track to present the regulatory proposal to the board in September of this year. And at this point, we do not expect to have another workshop for the board hearing. The standard regulatory impact assessment, or we also refer to it as the SRIA, will be posted to the California Department of Finance website no later than April 7th of this year, or just in a couple of weeks. The SRIA is a preliminary cost assessment that's required for all major regulations. And a major regulation is one that has an anticipated cost impact of over $50 million in a year. An updated cost assessment based on the final proposed regulation, along with the full regulatory proposal package, will be posted to the Zero-Emission Forklift webpage in early August of this year. Next slide, please. CARB staff would like to get feedback on the draft regulatory concept and other potential changes, including hearing any ideas that you may have on alternative approaches that could achieve similar emission reductions. As mentioned, staff has made many changes to the proposed regulation based on feedback that stakeholders have provided. We encourage continued stakeholder participation in this rulemaking process, and hopefully you'll provide us with a lot of feedback today and following this meeting. Next slide, please. CARB staff is developing the proposed regulation to reduce air pollutants. This includes, say, oxides of nitrogen, reactive organic gases, particulate matter, and greenhouse gases. This will help us meet federal and state air quality standards. This forklift measure is included in CARB's state implementation plans, mobile source strategy plans, and the Sustainable Freight Action Plan. In addition, deploying zero-emission technology supports our governor's executive order N7920, which directs state agencies to develop strategies to transition to 100% zero-emission off-road vehicles and equipment by year 2035, where feasible. Next slide, please. Now, we've presented this slide before. We're presenting it again to highlight the fact that Class 4 and Class 5 forklifts are the ones we're proposing to transition to zero-emission technology. Class 4 covers internal combustion forklifts with cushion tires, which are typically used indoors, while Class 5 includes internal combustion forklifts with pneumatic tires, and these tend to be more suitable for outdoor use. Next, please. Now I'll go ahead and describe our draft regulatory concept. Next slide, please. The proposed regulation applies to affected forklifts, which are defined as either Class 4 or Class 5 forklifts with large spark-ignited engines that have rated capacities of 12,000 pounds or less. Large spark-ignited forklifts includes, for instance, propane and gasoline-fueled forklifts. To give you an idea of the number of forklifts that could be affected by the regulation, staff estimates that the forklift fleet size of Class 4 and 5 forklifts in California is about 95,000. Next slide. Here's a list of excluded equipment and applications. There are a couple of proposed changes since our last workshop. One is the term military tactical vehicles has been replaced with combat and tactical support equipment, which aligns our terminology with the off-road diesel fleets regulation. And then also forklifts subject to the in-use off-road diesel regulation, diesel forklifts, have been removed from the list because they're not spark ignited and therefore would not be subject to the proposed regulation anyways. So the proposed excluded forklifts are rough terrain, combat and tactical support equipment, pallet jacks, forklifts with telescoping booms, forklifts owned or operated by facilities subject, forklifts owned or operated by facilities subject to CARB's mobile cargo handling equipment at ports regulation and CARB's intermodal rail yards regulation. Next, please. Now, we've updated the definition for forklift rated capacity, or what's commonly known as lift capacity. We're looking for your feedback on this to find out if you have any suggestions for improving it. Basically, we're proposing to use the rated capacity on the forklift nameplate. That information is identified on the plate per the forklift safety standard B56.1 that's published by the Industrial Truck Standards Development Foundation. We're proposing to use the rating with forks at a 24-inch or greater load center at the maximum load elevation for that load center. If the rated capacity is not with forks, the highest rated capacity for the forklift would be used. Next, please. The proposed regulation would apply to forklift fleet operators, both public and private, dealers, rental companies, and forklift manufacturers. Next slide, please. The proposed regulation would be composed of two main parts. One is on the restriction on the acquisition of new affected forklifts, and the second one is the phase out of the existing affected forklifts. So beginning in 2026, fleet operators would not be able to purchase new affected forklifts, that is LSI forklifts with a lift capacity of 12,000 pounds or less. Then by the beginning of 2028, all 2025 model year and older affected forklifts would start to be phased out of the fleet. Fleet operators would be able to purchase used affected forklifts provided that the forklift model year has not already been phased out. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to discuss the proposed fleet operator phase out requirements. Next. Okay, the model year phase out requirements would apply to small fleets and large fleets differently. The proposed regulation defines a small fleet as a fleet with 25 or less forklifts and a large fleet as one with 26 or more. Fleet size would be determined by the total number of forklifts owned by an entity, including their zero-emission forklifts. For an example, say when figuring out fleet size, a large home improvement company with many stores would include each of the California store's forklifts in its total fleet size. Next slide, please. So this slide describes the phase-out schedule for model year 2025 and older model year Class 4 forklifts. This slide only covers Class 4 forklifts, and Class 5 forklifts will be covered in the next slide. As presented at our previous workshop, staff is now proposing a grouped model year phase-out approach rather than a year-by-year phase-out approach. The second column covers the phase-out schedule for large fleets. The last column covers small fleets and agricultural fleets of any size. You can see that for large fleets, we're proposing phase-out beginning in 2028 with full implementation by 2035. For small fleets and agricultural fleets, the proposed regulation would offer an additional year of delay to the start of the phase-out. Also, for small and agricultural fleets, instead of phasing out a 10-year-old Class 4 affected forklift, staff is proposing to start phasing out 13-year-old forklifts instead. This, in effect, would give them 3 additional years to complete the phase-out. It's important to note that small and agricultural
Lori, look, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It looks like a couple of people have said they can't hear.
Okay.
Can we just pause and
Sure.
see, are generally folks that are listening to the workshop, are you guys able to hear us? It looks like 2 people said no sound. If I guess, how does it work? Would outside folks like be able to raise a hand and say they can hear us, or could they type into the Q&A that they can hear us? I'm not sure if it's an individual problem that 2 folks are having or if it's a general problem.
A lot of people in the Q&A saying that they can hear, they are able to hear. And I think one of the ones who said they had no sound says the sound is now back on for them.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry to interrupt, Lori.
Okay, looks like whatever happened is resolved.
Okay, yes, I certainly hope everybody can hear. Okay, so in effect, this would give them 3 additional years to complete the phase out. It's important to note that small and agricultural fleets would have the option to use the large fleet phase out schedule. For small fleets in particular, choosing the large fleet phase out schedule would help reduce the amount of reporting required. This is because the fleet would not be required to demonstrate that they are in fact a small fleet. Next slide, please. Now, this slide covers the model year phase out schedule specifically for Class 5 forklifts. As illustrated, the first phase out date for Class 5 forklifts would be January 1st of 2030 with full implementation in 2038. Also note that the phase out age for a Class 5 forklift is 13 years old, which is unchanged from the previous draft concept. Next slide. As you may be aware, staff first presented the grouped model year phase-out approach during the last workshop. Prior to that, staff proposed a year-by-year phase-out. Staff believes the grouped model year phase-out would provide fleet operators with additional flexibility on how they phase out forklifts each year. There would be additional lead time to get charging infrastructure installed at the facility. Fleet operators would have more flexibility on which model years to phase out each year. It would give fleet operators more time to make zero-emission forklift acquisitions. And note that while this approach would provide fleets with additional flexibility, it's important that fleets begin working on their transition to zero emission early. Things like charging infrastructure could take several months to get into place. So just because the compliance date is a few years out does not mean that fleet action would not be required. Next slide. Okay, let's go over an example for a large fleet. So the fleet, let's say that the fleet has a total of 40 forklifts and 30 of them are Class 4 forklifts and 10 are Class 5. The age of the forklift ranges from 1 to 10 years old in 2026. And let's assume there is an even distribution of forklifts for each model year. That is, there are 3 Class 4 forklifts for each model year between 2016 and 2025, and then 1 Class 5 forklift. Next slide. This table presents the date and the number of forklifts that would need to be turned over at each compliance date. Although this slide appears to indicate that a group of forklifts would be turned over at each compliance date, staff expects that fleets would smooth out their purchase of forklifts over each compliance period. That is, instead of, say, purchasing 9 replacement forklifts at the end of 2027, the forklift operator would be expected to spread out the purchases of replacement zero-emission forklifts between January 1st of 2026 and December 31st of 2027, possibly spreading it out in even groups of 3 for Class 4 and about 1 for Class 5 forklifts each year. The choice as to which model years are phased out in any particular year for the compliance period could be determined by the fleet operator. This is just an example. Next slide, please. Okay, let's run an example for a small fleet. Say that small fleet owns 10 Class 4 forklifts, which are between 6 and 15 years old in 2026, and that the age of the forklifts ranges from 6 to 15 years old in 2026. And let's go ahead and assume that there's an even distribution of forklifts for each model year. That is, there is 1 forklift for each model year between 2011 and 2020. Next slide, please. This table presents the date and number of forklifts that would be turned over by this small fleet at each compliance date. The table presented here indicates that the fleet operator would have to have its Class 4 fleet phased out by January 1st, 2034, due to the age of the fleet. And like what I stated for the large fleet example, small fleets would also be expected to spread out the purchases of replacement zero-emission forklifts across the intervals of each compliance deadline. Next slide. Now we'll go ahead and discuss compliance extension concepts. Some of the extensions have already been presented in past proposals, and some of them are new. Next, please. Okay, the first extension we'll cover is the forklift delivery delay extension. This was formerly called the product delay compliance extension. This extension is intended to help fleet operators stay in compliance when extra lead time is needed for acquiring a zero-emission forklift due to delays that are caused by issues outside of the fleet operator's control. This extension would be good for 1 year, with the option to renew each year until the zero-emission forklift is delivered. Next, please. Some proposed conditions for the forklift delivery delay extension include the following. The purchase order for the zero-emission forklift must have been placed at least 1 year prior to the compliance date, and a copy of the purchase order must be provided with the extension request. The fleet operator must provide an explanation and documentation that substantiates the delivery delay, and then the extension request must be submitted at least 45 days prior to the next compliance date. Next slide. Next, we'll cover the proposed infrastructure extensions. But first, I'd like to mention some of the guiding principles that staff used to develop the proposed provisions. An acknowledgement, first of all, that there could be circumstances beyond a fleet operator's control that results in the delay of necessary charging and fueling infrastructure. Fleet operators need to make all reasonable efforts to meet the timeframes proposed in the rule and must phase out as many LSI forklifts as possible prior to requesting an extension. Staff recognizes that some fleets have multiple locations and will take this into account in the development of applicable provisions. Also, staff aims to develop provisions that do not alter existing processes to plan for and build out electrical fueling infrastructure. The zero-emission forklift team is working with CARB's Advanced Clean Fleets team to make the infrastructure delay requirements as similar as possible between the two regulations. Next slide, please. Now I'll talk about staff's current thinking on an infrastructure construction delay extension. This extension would apply when the fleet operator cannot complete facility-side infrastructure upgrades by the compliance date. Examples of eligible reasons could include the change of a general contractor, a delay in manufacture or shipment of zero-emission charging or fueling infrastructure equipment, a delay in obtaining power from the utility, delays due to unexpected safety issues, discovery of resources described in the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA, or natural disasters. The length of the extension for facility-side upgrades would be based on the circumstances of the delay and could be up to 2 years. Next slide, please. Some proposed conditions for the infrastructure construction delay extension include all zero-emission forklifts that can be supported by the existing site infrastructure need to be deployed before the compliance date. Also, an executed contract for infrastructure installation needs to be in place with a permit issued at least 1 year prior to the compliance date. The applicant needs to include the rationale for requesting the extension, and to qualify for the extension, the completion date for the upgrades must go beyond the compliance date for the fleet. The extension must be applied for at least 45 days prior to the next compliance date. Next slide, please. Now we'll cover staff's current thinking on an infrastructure site electrification delay extension. This extension would apply when the electric utility cannot complete infrastructure upgrades by the compliance date. The maximum length of the delay extensions would be an initial 3-year and a final 2 years, depending on documentation from the electrical utility. Next, please. Some proposed conditions for the infrastructure site electrification delay extension include the fleet operator needs to phase out as much of their LSI fleet as possible using the available electrical capacity. To be eligible for the extension, the fleet operator needs to provide the executed utility contract or initial contract or application submitted to the utility with an attestation from the facility that they'll proceed with the project, a documented reason for the delay, and utility's response indicating that it will take more than 1 year. The request must be made at least 45 days before the next compliance date and before January 1st of 2031. Each site is evaluated separately. I think this is a good time for us to take a break from the presentation and to go ahead and take some comments or questions. Again, you have several options for asking questions. You can use Zoom's raise hand button. You can type your question in the Q&A webinar window. And for those who have joined by conference call, you can press #2 to raise your hand. And also, I just want to remind you that this workshop is being recorded.
Okay, so in the question and answer typed questions, we do have several questions. I'll start with Bruce Barber. Will there be a new proposed class of forklifts more relevant than replacing class 4 and 5 with class 1? Perhaps a class 4 ZE and class 5 ZE. ITA and OSHA do not seem to have any interest in updating their forklift classification. David, if you'd like to answer that one.
Yeah, sure. Excuse me. Thank you for the question, Bruce. I'm not 100% sure kind of what the concern is. Yeah, so when they're phasing out class 4s and 5s, the expectation is that they'll be replacing them with class 1s and class 2s. Class 1s, which are zero-emission forklifts other than narrow aisle forklifts, and class 2 are narrow aisle forklifts. And so the expectation is that they would be replacing the class 4s and 5s with those. I'm not sure why there would be a need to create new classifications, but I don't know if you want to maybe raise your hand and maybe kind of clarify the question. Maybe we can maybe have a better discussion on it, or I can give you a better answer. Thanks, Bruce.
All right,
go ahead. Sorry.
Next, we have Dean Taylor. Seems like you are excluding compression ignition forklifts. Is that correct? If so, why? Seems that excluding them would have unintended consequences of encouraging those who buy spark ignited engine forklifts to shift to compression ignition engine forklifts. Again, David.
Yeah, so the first reason is that those forklifts still have existing requirements in our off-road diesel fleets regulation. And so we're kind of letting those forklifts kind of get transitioned by that rule first. However, we do recognize, I guess, that there is this chance that folks could go diesel. And, I think like we believe here that, there is a benefit, operational benefits and other cost benefits of going zero. And so for folks to opt to go diesel, it must be because they're facing some unique challenges or some other challenges like that they can't overcome. And so, we've tried to structure this proposal so that, we're addressing things that could put a fleet in like in this impossible situation. These are things like the infrastructure extension delays. These are things like the product delivery delays, and other flexibilities that we're trying to build in. So to prevent folks from kind of just being kind of forced to go diesel because they can't make the zero emission options work for them. Also, it isn't in this rule, but it is still on our radar, and it could be something we include in a future rule. So that, I don't know if Kim, if you want to add anything to that, but so yes, we do realize there's a risk, and we're doing our best to kind of prevent that from happening. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next question is from Wade Smith. For fleet size determination, are existing zero emission lifts to be included? I believe the answer is yes, but David, if you would like to confirm.
Yes, they are. So we're not including the pallet jacks or the powered pallet jacks. So it would be adding basically all your internal combustion or affected forklifts to all the zero emission forklifts that you have, to class 1s and class 2s, and that would be used to determine your fleet size.
Thank you, David. We have a request from Derek Winters to repost or reshow slide 16. All right, Brad Rice asks, please explain the 13-year phase out.
Holmes, so maybe I'm thinking maybe was that the slide that was up when people's sound went out? So maybe if Lori could just cover this one and the following one again, since I think that was when we were having trouble with no sound.
Sure, Kim. Do you want me to do that now?
Yeah, maybe just that would answer
Okay.
Derek Winter's question, I think.
Okay, sure. Just go ahead. Okay, so slide 16. The model year phase out requirements would apply to small fleets and large fleets differently. The proposed regulation defines a small fleet as a fleet with 25 or less forklifts and a large fleet as one with 26 or more. Fleet size would be determined by the total number of forklifts owned by an entity, including their zero emission forklifts. For example, when figuring out fleet size, a large home improvement company with many stores would include each of the California stores in its total fleet size. Just slide 16, Kim?
I think so, but if others missed other slides, please just let us know. Thanks a lot, Lori.
Okay, and we're on to Brad Rice requesting an explanation of the 13-year phase out. David?
So why don't we pull up one of the slides, maybe 17 or 18, kind of showing the phase out tables. And so I'm not sure if your question was on this table or the table after this, but it's basically the same concept. So if you look at the right column here for small and agricultural fleets, we have kind of our phase out schedule. And so if you look at kind of the first phase out date there for those fleets, it would be January 1st, 2029. And at that point, they would have to phase out all their like 13-year-old and older forklifts. And so, and then the following compliance date for those fleets would be January 1st, 2032, in which again, they would be phasing out their 13-year-old forklifts. And so I think that answers your question, but if it doesn't, feel free to either raise your hand or ask it again. Thanks, Brad.
All right, we have Jason Anderson. Can you define fleet size by entity? We have 3 locations in California that produce different products and are operated by different management. Would all 3 be lumped together or each location fleet be individually categorized? David, if you want to back me up on this one and make any corrections, but I believe it is all of the forklifts at all 3 locations would comprise one fleet size.
Right. That's correct.
All right, Arturo Madrigal, what is considered a small fleet? And Arturo, that is 25 forklifts or less. And we have Curtis Clark. Oh, go ahead, David.
No, do we want to move to some of the raised hands? Just
Yes.
Okay, we have 6 raised hands. Edward Barton has a question. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your affiliation and ask your question.
My name is Edward Barton with CAL FIRE. Just looking for clarification. The only exemption to the rule is combat and technical support equipment or tactical support equipment. When you look at the definition of tactical support equipment, it says emergency relief. So I was wondering if emergency services like CAL FIRE and other organizations, do they fall into that umbrella according to CARB's definition of tactical support equipment, or is there no exemption for emergency support?
Thanks, Edward. So that is not the intent of that specific exclusion. After kind of taking into account your comments from our last workshop, we kind of refined what our emergency forklift exemption, and so we've kind of crafted some proposed language there, and the intent of that was to address like your fleets like yours, right, which are used for supporting emergency response, but may also do a little bit of non-emergency work as well. And so I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at that, but those provisions were developed to address fleets like yours.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Edward.
Okay, our next question is from Brian Harris. Brian, I've unmuted your mic. Please unmute yourself and state your affiliation and ask your question.
You're muted, Brian. Did we unmute you, or is it on your end? Brian, that's on your end. I think you're muted on your side.
There we go. I think I'm open now. This is Brian Harris. I'm with Pape Material Handling.
Hi, Brian. Oh, I think you were muted again.
Okay, I should be okay now.
Yeah, you're good now. I can hear you.
Okay. My question is on the change regulations concerning delayed implementation for a customer that has potentially ordered equipment, but the delivery of the equipment is delayed. On the one slide that was explaining that, I believe it stated that the customer had to have placed the order for the equipment 1 year prior to the implementation of the regulation. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. That means if the implementation is January 1st of 2026, the customer needs to have placed the order for the equipment, I'll say by January 1st of 2025. And then if the equipment is delayed past the January 1st, 2026 date and can prove the order date and the reason why the delay, that would be accepted by the state.
That is correct.
And so a customer who placed an order, call it in the middle of 25, would not be allowed an exemption for a 2026 delivery.
Yeah, they would not qualify for the delay, the extension.
Okay.
The delay extension. Sorry.
Perfect. That's a really specific thing I needed to make sure I'm clear on. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Daniel Langmaid. I have unmuted your mic. Please unmute yourself, state your affiliation and ask your question.
Hello, my name is Daniel. I'm with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. I just have a question about the model year phase out schedule. I was curious why CARB is going with model year phase out versus like a percentage of the fleet. I'm just wondering that in part because basically emissions are all, everything past like 2010 essentially has the same emissions. So this earlier compliance date is gonna get rid of a lot of the dirtier forklifts. So in part, I'm curious about that. And, to me, my understanding is a lot of fleets might buy multiple units, of the same year. So there might be fleets that have to turn over, a large portion of their units if they're all the same model year at once. So I was curious why CARB's going with this model year phase out versus just like a percentage of the fleet at a staggered point.
I
Yeah,
can
so-
take.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay,
Go
I can
ahead.
take that one. Yeah, thanks for the question. Largely, we're proposing the phase out be by model year to make it really straightforward to enforce. And of course, if we have an enforceable rule, that makes it much more likely we have a level playing field. Rules that are more like our CARB's current in use off-road diesel rule that rely on like a fleet average, or having to like see an entire fleet of owned equipment all at once are much more challenging to enforce. And so, like, for example, if we said, oh, you've got to phase out 10% of your forklifts per year, that would rely on us requiring a lot of reporting. So we know what 10% means for that fleet. And then it would also require us being able to sort of see the whole fleet at once. Whereas we want something where an inspector can show up really quickly, easily say, oh, okay, you've got something older than 2019, that's not allowed. Boom. And so that's largely why we've taken that approach. Oh, and to add, so with regard to your question of, well, what if a fleet's just sort of unlucky and they have all their forklifts are of one model year, and so suddenly they have to turn over all their forklifts all at once. It was situations like that, and also the concern of like, well, gosh, what if I just have a really bad year? Like there's just a bad year economically for me. There's something going on, particularly in my industry in that year. So if suddenly I can't afford to turn over forklifts in that one year, that's a large part of the reason we shifted to this more staggered phase out rather than requiring something boom, boom, boom every single year, to try to give fleets more ability to kind of plan ahead and spread out their compliance costs.
Okay, our next question is from John McClellan. I have unmuted your mic. Please unmute yourself and state your affiliation and ask your question.
Hey, John McClellan, American Rental Association. So you were talking about some of the exemptions with respect to infrastructure. And I just want to, again, make the point that this is going to be a huge issue because of the lack of any consistency in recharging standards, both with respect to, the voltages and things that are going in, but also the connections with vehicles or with the equipment. We have recently at ARA been looking into some of this issue, and we have discovered what we believe is the group that worked with the automobile manufacturers. It's something called Open Charge Alliance, the Open Charge Alliance. And Kim and David, I have sent you an email with that, a link to their website. We really are going to strenuously urge that CARB look into this, figure out how we can bring users and manufacturers together so that we can do something similar to what the automobile industry has done, so that we are not going to be faced with the issue of how we're going to recharge equipment, because that is going to cause either having a significant reduction in the number of forklifts that are available in California, or folks not being able to comply in time. So that's my comment for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We'll look into that.
Okay, we have another question from Shane Seaver. I have unmuted your mic. Please unmute yourself, state your affiliation, and ask your question.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for allowing me to comment. First off, I'm in a medical office, so I want to make sure that you can hear me okay. Can you confirm that?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. My name is Shane Seaver, Vista Metals. And so I wanted to just ask some questions, I guess, generally about if there's any type of if you would consider any type of industry carve out. I think it's a relatively small industry relative to the overall fleet. So we are in the basically the metals business. We handle scrap aluminum, all different configurations, pieces. We remelt it. We put it into new aerospace grade alloys is essentially what it amounts to. In our metal and scrap handling procedures, it does not happen regularly. It also happens more often than I'd like to say. We have a situation where potentially a forklift in handling scrap may drive over a piece of scrap material, may hit something, may do some other things, and we can puncture an oil pan, we can puncture a transfer case, we can break a differential. It's a very rough business, and so I'm highly concerned if, in terms of the forklifts that we use, if we had to go to electrics across the board, if we were to have a piece of material that would puncture the undercarriage of a battery, we would have a short circuit, we would have a meltdown, kind of like when you see the very rare instance of an electric car that hits something on a roadway where you expect there not to be debris. My situation is probably a little more unique. In terms of it, I would actually welcome any representatives from CARB to come out and take a look at my application. I'd be happy to host a video chat just to show you the application. But we use basically class 4 and class 5 lifts, but we do break them occasionally in a way where right now when we do it, the machine is down, it leaks, it makes a little bit of a mess, we clean it up, we fix it. I don't have to worry about a short circuit or a major fire event, and I'm scared to death that this will happen. So really more of a comment than a question, but it's something I would like some consideration on, and I would be happy to host you guys in some way to show you exactly what I'm talking about.
Sure. Thank you, Shane. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe, we'd love to kind of know more about the challenges. I know we've kind of talked about this before. I would say just like at this point, I'm just not convinced that that isn't an issue that can't be resolved if it is an issue today. I mean, if for example, the undercarriage or the side panels of a forklift are not robust enough today to kind of withstand a piece of scrap metal kind of, puncturing it. I don't think that's something that a manufacturer can't resolve in the future. I mean, I know like this is probably a concern for all vehicles and equipment that use lithium ion batteries, right? Like on-road vehicles as well. And so I think we can continue discussing this, but I'm just like, at this point, just to let you know where I'm at, is this, I'm not sure that's something that that a deal breaker essentially for including in the rule.
But I think we'd be happy to meet with you and look at your forklifts and see, if there's something that we're missing here. We also asked later in this presentation about exemptions and extensions and stuff. So if you think there's something needed that we're not proposing, please suggest what that is. We have one that we were considering before regarding feasibility that we don't think is needed, but if you think it is for this reason or others, please let us know.
Right, and I'll just add also is like we've tried to structure the rule where there is flexibility. So if the industry does need more time to kind of address these issues, we've structured the rule so we think that that it does provide like sufficient time and opportunity for these issues to get worked out. But again, like Kim said, we can continue discussing this, and maybe if there's an opportunity, we can come take a look at your operations. So yeah, thank you again for the comment, Shane.
Okay, we have another question from Brad Rice. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name, your affiliation, and ask your question.
Hi there, I'm Brad with Pacific Coast Producers, and it's a follow-up to my earlier question that David answered. And he answered the small fleets phase out period is 2016, which is 13 years. It appears a large fleet is 10 years. And I just want confirmation of that. And if so, why was that decision made versus the 13-year?
Yeah, so you are correct that the large fleets do phase out 10-year-old forklifts versus 13. And basically we believe large fleets are more capable to phase out more quickly. And so we just think that for smaller fleets and ag fleets, it's going to be more challenging for them to phase out the forklift. So we gave them some more time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a comment from Regina Sue. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name and your affiliation and ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Regina Sue and I'm with Earth Justice. I just wanted to ask about the impact to the emission reductions and health benefits analysis presented in previous workshops with this new grouped model year phase out approach. It also just wanted to point out that Governor Newsom's executive order calls for 100% zero emission off-road equipment by 2035 where feasible, and especially in an area where zero emissions is already being deployed and presents clear cost advantages. I wanted to ask whether you're considering moving up this phase out schedule for all fleets by 2035, especially considering the flexibilities in this rule that would allow for extension. Thank you.
I don't have the numbers. Well, thank you, Regina, for the question. I don't have the numbers offhand, but I don't believe the change to the phase out, the model year phase out, impacts the emissions significantly. And you know, all the changes that we've made to the concept is really to address, you know, we believe kind of like feasibility issues, essentially, like fleets not being able to either absorb the cost of the phase out, or you know they're going to have to work through like operational challenges and or other technical challenges. Like the extensions are there because we believe, you know, they're necessary to address like, you know, these potentially like impossible situations, right, where fleet can't get the infrastructure, as an example, to charge forklifts. And so like an extension is needed because it's like there's nothing they can do to deploy those. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, Regina. I don't know if Kim, you have anything to add. But at this point, you know, that's kind of what we're proposing. I think we can probably, I know you sent us a letter yesterday, last night, and with your comments, and maybe we can you know, discuss a little bit more about kind of the rationale of why we did things, and then we can kind of go over like what your thoughts on trying to push a little faster.
Yeah, I would just add, yeah, we definitely really appreciate your engagement on this issue. And we're just trying to set this up like some undesirable things that could happen if we push like too hard, too fast are, one, you could be putting fleets in the situation where they're sort of stuck between CARB and the utility, and it's impossible for them to comply. And we're really trying to avoid that situation while maintaining as fast progress towards the zero emission future as we can. We also don't want to push fleets into the situation where they're like, well, I just can't comply with this, so I'll just wait and see if CARB catches me. Like, we don't want to push people into just sort of gambling that they won't get caught. And so we're trying to be sensitive to all the concerns and, you know, how fleets will actually need to sort of plan this out and pay for it. So we make this like a really doable rule. So that's some of the reason you're seeing us do things like staggered compliance dates. And we also are thinking about the ability for fleets to apply for incentive funding. Like if the first compliance date's too fast, it means that small fleets wouldn't be able to like apply for more funding because it wouldn't be surplus. And so we're trying to leave the door open for folks to pursue incentive funding. But definitely would be happy to talk with you guys one-on-one, or, you know, explore this further, and really glad to have you here and commenting on this important rulemaking.
Do you want me to continue with the raised hand questions?
So I'm thinking we might want to just get through the presentation. I don't know if Kim, you have any objections with that, and take the rest of the questions at the end. What do you think about that, Kim?
Are there any more? I know there's a lot of infrastructure questions. It probably makes sense to take those after, but are there Let me just take a couple of these so
Okay.
that were related to things we discussed. So Michael Obermiller asked, does the exemption for small fleets of 3 or less forklifts still apply? And he's referring to the current large spark ignition rule from CARB, which does not apply to fleets of 3 or less, but this rule would apply to those. So that exemption would no longer be part of this rulemaking. So fleets, even somebody that owns 1 forklift would need to pay attention to this and comply with it. Trying to see if there's others. Oh, with the Fernando Oliveira asked, will the Carl Moyer program be able to be used for replacing current equipment? And as I just mentioned, the Carl Moyer program is an incentive program, and it's made to pay for things that go beyond what rules require or occur earlier than what a rule would require. So it can only pay for emission benefits that are kind of surplus to what regulations would require. And so we are hopeful that some fleets could consider applying for such funding, and that is sort of feeding into our decisions about how we set up the compliance dates. Of course, we just want to be honest, acknowledge we don't expect that every fleet's going to be able to get state incentive money to pay for all of this. We do think there will be some some compliance costs, but we think those will be more than offset by the fuel savings that folks get long-term from using zero-emission forklifts. And I'm looking. Holmes, is there anything else in here that's just clarification from the earlier slides? If not, then yeah, I think finishing the presentation would be great.
I'm still going through them, but I have not, it looks like it'd be okay to move them.
Okay,
off.
thanks.
So Lori, why don't we continue?
Okay, can we go to slide 32, please? Thank you. Now we'll discuss possible exemptions. Next slide. Okay, as CARB staff proposed earlier, we're continuing to propose a low use exemption for fleet operators that use some of their forklifts less than 200 hours per year. Now, this exemption allows only certain model years. And in earlier versions of the regulation, there was a 10% limit on the number of low use forklifts that a fleet operator could use. We've removed that limit. Annual reporting and labeling would be required for all fleets that want to use this exemption. However, the exemption would sunset by 2031, except for micro businesses, which would be able to maintain 1 low-use forklift indefinitely. To provide more flexibility, CARB staff is also considering a 3-year, 200-hour rolling average instead of a 1-year, 200-hour compliance timeframe for micro businesses. Okay. Now, here is how the draft proposal defines a micro business. Micro business would have annual gross receipts of $5 million or less and 25 or fewer employees. To qualify, the micro business would need to provide annual attestations and maintain supporting documentation. Next slide. Staff is considering providing an exemption for forklifts that are used in dedicated emergency operations. These forklifts could be used for non-emergency purposes, provided that the non-emergency hours are less than 200 per year. Annual reporting and a forklift label would be required, and dedicated emergency forklifts would not be counted as part of a fleet when establishing your fleet size for the phase-out schedule. Next slide, please. Staff is proposing to add an exemption for new affected forklifts that are being transported through California with a final destination outside of California, provided the following. There needs to be documentation indicating that the final delivery location for the phased out forklift will be outside of California. The new forklift will only be operated in California for the purpose of delivery preparation. And the new forklift can be in California for up to 3 months. Next slide. Prior versions of the proposed regulation stated that a phased out forklift could not remain on the site longer than 5 days. Based on your feedback, we're proposing to give fleet operators more time to dispose of the forklift. We're proposing a hold time of 6 months, as long as components like the forks or work attachments are removed, along with the seat, battery, steering wheel, and for propane forklifts, the propane fuel tank. Next slide, please. As we've mentioned, the proposed regulation is intended to facilitate the transition to zero-emission technology. To help the transition, staff is proposing to give fleet operators and rental agencies a delay in replacing an affected forklift. If they replace a forklift with a lift capacity of over 12,000 pounds with a zero-emission version. Next slide. Now, the proposed delay could allow a fleet operator or rental agency to keep an effective forklift until 2038. The credit could only be used by the same fleet that generated the credit. The fleet operator or rental agency would need to provide relevant information at least 45 days prior to the phase-out date of the effective forklift, for which the compliance date would be delayed. Next slide. Okay, forklift rental agencies, dealers, and manufacturers would also be subject to the regulation as described in the next few slides. Rental agencies would be required to follow the same model year phase-out schedule as fleet operators. However, a rental agency would be allowed to purchase new Class 5 forklifts until 2029 to rent out to fleet operators. But these would also have to be phased out in 2038, along with the 2023 to 2025 model year Class 5 effective forklifts. As presented at the last workshop, forklift dealers would not be permitted to sell Class 4 forklifts to fleet operators or rental agencies after 2026. Class 5 forklifts could only be sold to rental agencies until 2029. The forklift dealers would be required to maintain certain information about sales transactions of affected forklifts and to provide limited reporting on an annual basis. Next slide. The proposed requirements for manufacturers have not changed since the July release of the draft regulation, which required that manufacturers would not be permitted to sell a Class 4 forklift starting in 2026, nor a Class 5 forklift starting in 2029. And forklift manufacturers would be required to provide CARB with annual production and sales reporting. Next slide. Okay, now we'll begin talking about reporting requirements. Next. Now I'm going to go over in a bit more detail reporting requirements that would apply. To start, I'll cover reporting requirements for the phase out of affected forklifts by fleet operators and rental agencies. So fleet operators and rental agencies would need to submit an initial report between September 1st and October 31st of 2025. The initial report would contain information about the entity, such as name, address, contact person, and responsible official. For fleets that opt to qualify as a small fleet for the purpose of the phase out, forklift fleet information would also be required. This is because the reporting would be necessary to verify that the fleet is small. If a small fleet opts to use the large fleet phase out, then the forklift fleet information would not be required. In subsequent years, fleets would be required to submit annual reports between January 1st and April 30th of each year. They would need to update the reported information and to provide an attestation from the responsible official that the official understands the fleet's compliance obligations. When a large fleet has phased out all of their affected forklifts, the responsible official would need to submit a confirmation of completion of the phase out. This confirmation of completion would need to be submitted no later than June 30th of 2035 for Class 4 forklifts and no later than June 30th of 2038 for Class 5. Agricultural operations that choose to use the small fleet phase-out schedule will need to submit the confirmation of completion of the phase-out for both Class 4 and 5 forklifts no later than June 30th of 2038. And labeling of effective forklifts to be phased out would not be required. Next slide. Similar reporting requirements are being proposed for forklift dealers. Dealers would need to submit an initial report between September 1st and October 31st of 2025 with information such as name, address, contact person, and responsible official. And then in subsequent years, dealers would be required to submit annual reports between January 1st and April 30th of each year. They would need to update reported information and to provide an attestation from the responsible official that the official understands the fleet's compliance obligations. Although sales and lease transaction information would not need to be reported annually, record keeping for effective forklift sales would be required. Dealers would be required to maintain such information for a minimum of 5 years following a transaction. Next slide, please. Although not covered here in further detail, reporting would also be required to qualify as a microbusiness. It would also be required for fleets that maintain a low-use forklift or a dedicated emergency forklift, and also for the various compliance extensions that we've discussed. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to cover some changes that staff is considering. Next slide. We are looking for feedback on whether another criterion should be used as the basis for the scope of this regulation. Rated capacity depends on many variables, such as the load center, load elevation, attachment weight, and tire width. Staff has tried to further refine the definition of rated capacity to reduce the impact of such variables. For example, in the current draft regulation, staff is proposing to specify the load center used. However, staff would like input on other possible criteria on which to base the regulatory scope that could that could further reduce or eliminate the impact of variables. Stakeholders have suggested forklift weight might be a more appropriate criterion. Staff would like feedback on whether that should be considered, the forklift weight. Staff believes using forklift weight may reduce the impact of the variables, and it's something that can still be verified by looking at the forklift nameplate. We also welcome other suggestions that stakeholders may have. Next slide. Staff would also like input on expanding the scope of the proposed regulation to include larger forklifts, that is, forklifts with a rated capacity greater than 12,000 pounds. For simplicity of discussion, I will refer to these forklifts here as heavy forklifts. The zero-emission industry continues to grow, and there are currently over 91 models or configurations of zero-emission heavy forklifts that are eligible for funding in California's Clean Off-Road Equipment Voucher Incentive Project, or what's also known as the CORE program. Furthermore, there are also other makes and models of heavy forklifts that are commercially available, but for which manufacturers have not sought for eligibility. More than 40 heavy forklifts have been funded through the CORE program alone, and activity in that segment continues to grow. Given the current state of technology, we're interested in getting feedback on whether it would be appropriate to expand the regulatory scope. If such forklifts could be included, they could be included with the later compliance dates than those forklifts already subject to the current proposal. Next slide, please. Staff has modeled its proposal for the infrastructure site electrification delay extension after the analogous extension in the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. That extension in the Advanced Clean Fleets rule is currently being refined. and an updated proposal will be released for public comments fairly soon. When those changes are finalized, staff will reassess the provisions in the zero-emission forklift proposal and align as warranted. That said, staff understands that fleets that would be subject to the zero-emission forklift rule could face different circumstances and challenges than those subject to the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. Therefore, staff continues to seek feedback and input from stakeholders on all elements of the extension, including extension time and process, as well as on other potential infrastructure issues that would not be addressed by the currently proposed provisions. Next slide, please. Staff seeks comment on providing a potential feasibility extension to allow fleets and manufacturers to work through feasibility issues they may face as the California forklift fleet further transitions to zero-emission technology. At the last workshop, staff stated that a feasibility delay was being considered. However, after further consideration, staff believes the current proposal, through its built-in flexibilities, would provide fleets and manufacturers with enough time and opportunity to work through operational challenges and technology limitations that may exist today. That said, if stakeholders still believe a feasibility extension is necessary, staff seeks comment as to why the current proposal would not be adequate in addressing feasibility issues. Next, please. Staff seeks comment as to whether a small government agency should be able to qualify as a microbusiness. Under the current proposal, they would already be able to utilize the small fleet phase out if they have fewer than 26 forklifts. However, should they be able to maintain a low-use forklift indefinitely, like a microbusiness? Staff suspects that small government agencies could face similar challenges that a microbusiness could, but we really would like more input as to whether that would be the case. Additionally, if a government agency is allowed to qualify as a microbusiness, what criteria should be used to categorize a government agency as small? Next slide. Okay, now we're going to cover the environmental analysis for this proposed regulation. CARB is preparing a programmatic level environmental analysis, or EA, assessing the potential for adverse and beneficial environmental impacts associated with the proposed zero-emission forklift regulation. The EA is prepared according to the requirements of our certified regulatory program under the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. The EA will be based on the anticipated, reasonably foreseeable actions undertaken by entities in response to the proposed amendments, which could have the potential to cause indirect physical changes to the environment. CARB is using the CEQA environmental checklist, Appendix G from the CEQA guidelines, as a framework for assessing the potential for significant impacts resulting from reasonably foreseeable actions. The checklist includes criteria related to resource areas such as aesthetics, agricultural and forest resources, biological resources, cultural resources, geologic and soil resources, hazards and hazardous materials, among others. The EA will be included as an appendix to the staff report. Next slide, please. The environmental analysis will include a description of the reasonably foreseeable actions that appear most likely to occur as a result of implementing the proposed regulation, the potential adverse impacts and feasible mitigation measures, and alternative analysis. Staff welcomes public input on the appropriate scope and content of the EA as it's being developed, including the reasonably foreseeable actions that may occur in response to the proposal, the potential significant adverse impacts, potential feasible mitigation measures, and feasible alternatives to the proposal, that could reduce or eliminate any significant adverse impacts. The draft EA will be released for a 45-day public comment period with the staff report later in 2023. Next slide. Okay, there are some other areas in which staff is looking for your feedback. One item is whether a remote site exemption or extension is needed. The remote work site question has been brought up multiple times, but staff has received little feedback on the issue. Another is whether we need a specific exclusion for combat and tactical support equipment. We have not received any comments on it, and we're wondering if it's really necessary. Also, do you think there would be any benefit in setting up a certification procedure for zero-emission forklifts? Of course, staff wants your feedback on the environmental analysis and any other issues that you'd like to bring up about the draft regulatory concept. Next slide. Okay, now we'll go ahead and discuss the next steps and provide contact information. Staff is hoping to continue to work with stakeholders to get input on the proposed concepts, then further refine the draft regulatory text. The standard regulatory impact assessment, or SRIA, as we've mentioned, we call it, will be sent to the Department of Finance in April, next month of this year. Depending on stakeholder input and concept changes, staff may hold additional public meetings. The proposed regulation is scheduled to go to the board in the fall of this year. Next slide. Here is our contact information. Next slide. And presented here are the Zero-Emission Forklift webpage link, the subscriber list link for getting email updates on the Zero-Emission Forklift regulation, and a link to CARB's other off-road equipment regulations. Next slide. Now we'll go ahead and take comments and questions on the regulation. If we don't get to all the questions during the meeting, please send your questions or comments to the Zero-Emission Forklifts email address or contact staff. As a reminder, this workshop is being recorded and the recording will be posted to the Zero-Emission Forklift website. Thank you.
Okay, we have over 30 questions in the Q&A. Maybe we'll take the first 10 and then switch over to live questions with hands up. Does that work for you, Marjorie?
Sounds good.
Okay, so our first question comes from Curtis Clark. For units going into Mexico or Hawaii, will there be an exception for these units coming into California since they do not carry the same LSI regulations proposed? Keith, if you'd like to take that.
Yes, the answer is, yeah, they will be able to come into California for 3 months. These are new units only. And they will require some documentation, proof that they are leaving the state within a 3-month period.
Thank you, Keith. And if you can do the next question as well, it comes from Glenn Cho. Just for clarification, the exemption offered for ZE forklift regulation is similar to exemption offered by ACF regulation.
That is correct. However, there may be some variations due to specific circumstances that we see with forklifts versus on-road vehicles. So yes, as similar as we can make it.
Thank you, Keith. Scott Governor asks, fleet operators cannot compel utilities to provide documentation concerning delays, especially in the case of PG&E, which is experiencing systemic delays. What is a fleet operator supposed to do in this circumstance? David?
I was muted. Sorry about that. Thank you, Scott, for that question. So from what we understand, the documentation that we've asked for in the utility or site electrification extension is is obtainable from the utilities. And so if you don't believe that's the case, then we probably can discuss after this workshop, and you can basically maybe let us know what you think is not possible. Right now, I think what's in there is like you either have to have an executed contract with utility to do that expansion or do the upgrades. But if you can't get that, then you need to provide like your application that you've requesting the upgrade, and then I guess an attestation from the utility saying that they'll take on the project. And from what I understand, that was actually something the utility suggested as an alternative to an executed contract. So this is something they said that they can provide. But you know, if your experience is different or you're hearing otherwise, you know, please reach out to us after the workshop and we can discuss in more detail. Thanks, Scott.
Our next question is from Curtis Clark, and it's the first of many LSI questions that we have. With new equipment lead time delays on LSI units, while the units cannot be bought after 2026, when can the last LSIs be shipped to an end user? Currently, some manufacturers have a 90 to 104 week lead time on LSI lift trucks, both class 4 and 5. Potentially a customer trying to buy in 2025 to have a compliant LSI through your phase out may not get that for 2 years, meaning their new unit wouldn't arrive until 2027. Has there been any consideration for that, or are you trying to cover that with your forklift delay rule? Yep.
I'm muted. Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. And I did want to flag for folks in case we haven't mentioned it that we do have our current draft regulatory language posted on our website. So for any of these detailed questions, we would really welcome you to take a look at that language and read it carefully and see if you think there's anything you think we need to tweak. We definitely are aware of the current delays and all the supply chain issues that are occurring. And we have included in our current draft a forklift delivery delay extension that basically recognizes that if someone is needing to turn over to a new zero emission forklift, but there's delays on getting that then they'd be allowed to keep their LSI forklift for longer while that delay is occurring. I would refer the commenter to take a look at the requirements in the reg for how exactly we define when manufacturers and dealers need to do what, and see if that causes any concern for you. So I don't know if David or Keith wanted to add anything on that.
I think you covered it, Kim.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, our next question is from Bobby Gustafson. I work for an essential public utility. We have 3 forklifts with 3 separate weight limits. All 3 are used less than 200 hours a year. As proposed, we cannot request a low use exclusion. Can an exclusion be made for low use for a situation like ours? David?
I would ask, I guess, of you why you can't use zero emission technology in those applications. Under the current rule, right, the low use exemption basically goes away on January 1st, 2031 for most fleets, except micro business that can kind of keep one after that. But if you have reasons to believe that you can't use zero emission forklifts in your application, you know, please reach out to us afterwards and we can talk about it. Thanks, Bobby.
All right, Bruce Ferber asks, David, I will send you an email with the explanation for the classification question. Sorry, I guess didn't need to read that as a question. Sorry about that. Gary Cross, not all forklifts show rated capacity as opposed to capacity. Is CARB aware of this? If so, what is the solution?
So, okay, maybe we need to talk about this, but my understanding is that the rated capacity or capacities are all indicated on the forklift because OSHA requires that information to be there. If that's not the case, then Yeah, let's talk, I guess, offline afterwards, but that is my understanding of what's actually on the nameplate. Maybe it's just the terminology is not correct, but let's talk about that. Thanks, Gary.
And a question for Keith. Linus Farias asks for an explanation on how a utility extension will be applied.
Well, the utility extension would be applied, and it can be applied up to 5 years in a 3 and a 2-year duration for each. You would have to submit documentation that you have been working with the utility and trying to get infrastructure in to your facility. And also there's timing requirements on that as to when you need to submit that documentation.
Thank you. John Schneider asks, is there any provision for fleets that operate 24/7? Operating duration of electric lifts and the lack of efficient battery swapping options means there's not a one-to-one replacement option. For example, it would take more than one electric lift to replace a single current lift. Kim? Kim, you're muted.
Oh, maybe I could take this. So yeah, there is no provision for fleets that operate 24/7. I mean, from what we understand, especially with like lithium ion technologies kind of taken off, that you can basically use that technology to in 24/7 operations. I mean, they require not very much time at all to fully charge. And so it seems like, at least from what we understand, that technology would work.
Great.
And the only other thing I was going to mention was, so there's opportunities for opportunity charging, and then definitely consider fuel cell forklifts.
Okay, we'll take 2 more of these questions and then hand it over to Marjorie for raised hands. Alan Colcamo asks, can CARB please further explain the reason for rated capacity? Nameplate capacity. CARB originally had the model or spec sheet capacity, which is a better comparison between class 1 and class 4 and 5.
So, I mean, the nameplate capacity is something that could be verified by very easily by anybody kind of looking at that forklift. Like if an inspector or an enforcement person went out and looked, they could immediately identify that what the lift capacity of that forklift is. One concern with like the spec sheet capacity, and I'm guessing you mean like the base capacity for a specific chassis. One problem with that is that there is no standard, I guess, industry-wide standard for manufacturers to how they determine that. I mean, it says, for a forklift, it might have a base capacity of 8,000 pounds for that chassis, but at least from what I understand, there's no specific standard that manufacturers have to follow in order to determine that. And so that's an issue there. But I mean, if you'd like to continue these discussions, we can talk about it, but that's kind of why we're using the nameplate capacity versus the spec sheet capacity.
Okay, and Melody Black asks, are you planning any additional updates or workshops between the April SRIA submission to the Department of Finance and board consideration in September? I think that's going to depend on the feedback that we get and any changes we make, but Kim, if you'd like to take that one.
Yeah, no, our current plan is not to have any more formal work groups or workshops. However, we're always happy to speak to people one-on-one. And as Holmes indicated, if something unexpected comes up and we realize there's a need for a broad public meeting, of course, we can consider doing that. But we really definitely urge you, especially for the things you hear us explicitly asking about, to please give us your ideas and feedback. And then please take a look at the draft reg language that we've released. And if you see anything in there that you think isn't clear or you think we're not doing it the way we should, please do tell us, because as time marches forward closer to the official board consideration, it gets harder and harder for us to change things. So the earlier we hear from folks, the better.
Okay, so I'm going to take it back to raised hand questions. We have a question from Chris Howie. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name and affiliation and ask your question.
I apologize. I don't have a question. I accidentally hit the button, but I do have two questions in the question and answer area. If I can ask those while I have the opportunity.
Sure, go, Chris. If you want to ask
Okay,
now.
so the model year reference mentioned a couple slides before. By the way, I'm affiliated with Kubota Engine America. Sorry about that. Is that referring to the engine model year or the chassis model year only?
Right now, the definition kind of refers to both. We're kind of thinking about like what to do there right now, because from what we understand is that the model year of the chassis isn't always on the actual forklift itself. So we are internally discussing whether to kind of just go to engine model year at this point, but what's in the reg now is, it includes both. Yes, thank you.
And I apologize if I'm just revealing my ignorance here, but as far as hydrogen fueled combustion engines, those are technically a spark ignited technology, but they don't have the issues with carbon emissions that we typically see with standard hydrocarbon type. Are those also considered a zero emission technology?
No, they're not.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's still concerns of like NOx emissions and stuff from those engines. So.
Okay, NOx is the driving reason behind that. Okay, thank
Well,
you.
I mean, this was a zero emission measure, and so it would any emissions like we were just from the forklift. Yeah.
Okay, it's all
both
total
criteria,
tailpipe emissions,
GHG.
regardless of the type. Okay, thank you.
Okay, our next question or comment is from Daniel Langmaid. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. I was following up on my earlier question and just had a comment. I did put it in the chat, but you know, I would be supportive of a zero emission forklift certification process. I know that was talked about in earlier working groups and brought up, so that would be something I would be supportive of. I also was wondering, you know, in previous working groups, it was, you know, brought up about the forklift inventories and that there's a lot of forklifts that may not be reporting that are, you know, actually operating in the state. So I was curious, you know, as far as these, the tier charts that you have, if you knew how many, you know, would be turned over, you know, for each kind of phase that you have, you know, so the first one, like what percentage of forklifts would, you know, be removed from operation. I was just wondering if you had a concept of that. And additionally, I see that part of the order has credits proposed for turning over forklifts that are higher lift capacity than 12,000. So I was wondering, you know, how that would work. I'm assuming with like the car and wire program, incentive programs that, you know, if those programs funded something, you know, that was higher than 12,000, that it would, you know, after our contracts were done with the applicant, then that's when those credits could be applied. But I was just curious if there was some thoughts on that as well. I know that was like 3 questions, so thank you.
Let me take the first part. So I have actually a follow-up question for you. You're saying that you do prefer that we require certification for zero emission forklifts. Can you explain why you want that? What use you think that would provide?
Well, so I guess I'm speaking more towards, you know, I work in the incentive programs at my area district, and we do lots of funding for zero emission forklifts, but we do have to go through a case-by-case approval with the state. And I know zero emission forklifts have been around for decades. So I guess the support from me would be to make that process easier. You know, so there could be something in place that we could more easily approve projects because, you know, there would be a certification in place already.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, on your other question, other questions you said about the forklift inventory and the volumes, I guess, of turnover year to year. I mean, we have numbers that, and we could probably talk offline. They'll probably, I think they will be reflected in our SRIA, at least to some extent. But what we see is just generally at a high level, there is kind of like a higher turnover rate kind of initially that kind of tapers off later, based on the phase that we have right now. In terms of like the overlap of our credit incentives, obviously, I mean, honestly, we haven't actually thought that far on that yet. I mean, we're just that this is an idea that we came up fairly recently, that we should maybe give credits for larger forklifts. But definitely, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's something we should be thinking about.
And Daniel, just to interject here real quick, you did mention as far as the credits and Carl Moyer can't fund any credits. So I'm actually going to reach out to you via email, and we can follow up with a discussion on how that would work.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Sounds
Holmes.
good. I did want to mention that the earlier that people come into these incentive programs, the better. So just want to plug them. You know, if you have interest in getting incentives, please talk to your local air districts and try to get projects in as soon as possible.
Thank you, Daniel.
Okay, next we have a question or comment from Krista Weiner. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Krista Warner, Western Propane Gas Association, with public comment. Last month, our association submitted a list of 20 specified questions to CARB regarding the proposed regulation on zero-emission forklifts. No response has been received, and after reading the new regulation draft and staff presentation, these critical questions remain unanswered. Our questions include systematic problems with modeling of cost and emissions, and assumptions regarding consumer benefits, cost of electricity, unanticipated capital costs, useful life of equipment, and leakage. First, CARB is not accounted for revenue loss during charge time, considering that battery electric forklifts are unable to run 24/7. We request that CARB add an exemption for fleets that require 24-hour on-site operations to protect fleet owners and operators from having to significantly increase fleet size to meet their current operational needs. Second, it has been stated that modeling assumptions have been made based on the DOORS database. Since that data is not publicly available, we have requested information regarding the breakdown of life cycle emissions by fuel type, model year, and segment of total state emissions. We request that CARB delay the submission of their standardized regulatory impact assessment until third parties can submit detailed analyses of emissions and cost modeling for inclusion in the assessment. Third, if the policy goal is to reduce emissions produced by affected forklifts operated in California, the proposed regulation is reaching this goal by simply shifting the problem out of state. The rule also fails to recognize the shift in NOx emissions from vehicles to electricity generation. A study completed in December of 21 highlighted that the marginal grid emissions in NOx were approximately 0.35 grams per kilowatt hour, whereas a 2.4 liter propane LSI forklift generated only 0.13 grams per kilowatt hour for its life cycle. We request that CARB incorporate global life cycle emissions into its modeling to accurately address leakage. We believe there are additional pathways that can protect affected industries and operators from these unintended consequences by phasing out older, higher emitting pre-2011 model year forklifts for newer forklifts, accelerating the adoption of stricter NOx standards for LSI engines, and delaying the start date of the rule until an implementation working group can be convened and publish its findings. We will be connecting with CARB board and staff to reiterate these concerns and work together to address the significant impacts across California's businesses and industries. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. We'll go look at your comments and then we'll touch base with you after. I personally haven't seen the letter myself, but we will definitely go look for the letter and then we'll touch base with you after. Sorry about that. Thanks, Krista.
Hi, our next question is from Jane Stevenson. I have unmuted your mic. Can you please unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and ask your question?
Hello, thank you for the presentation and the opportunity to provide public comments today. My name is Jane Stevenson and I'm with the organization Pacific Environment. We are an environmental nonprofit group dedicated to protecting communities and the environments around the Pacific Rim. We want to align our comments with our colleagues from Earth Justice who are submitting comments on this rulemaking. We support a strong zero emissions forklift rule that completely phases out internal combustion engines by 2035. This will result in significant emissions reductions and life-saving health benefits, which are especially important for communities living near freight hotspots in California. The transition to zero emission forklifts is especially crucial for the South Coast. This air basin has a large warehouse industry and is one of the most polluted regions in the state, which has only been exacerbated by the port congestion crisis at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach over the past 2 years. Moreover, Long Beach and Los Angeles port-adjacent communities, including West Long Beach, Wilmington, and San Pedro, already experience up to 8 years lower life expectancy than the Los Angeles County average. We urge CARB to reconsider the phase-out schedule for forklifts. Given that zero-emission forklifts are already available and in use, there's no reason for the phase-out of internal combustion forklifts to be delayed. The proposed rule contains many exemptions and flexibilities, so we ask CARB to phase out polluting forklifts beginning in 2026 as previously proposed and completely phase out internal combustion engines by 2035. This timeline is necessary to deliver public health benefits to communities as soon as possible and advance the state's goal of achieving 100% zero-emission off-road equipment by 2035. We urge CARB staff to prioritize public health in this rulemaking to ensure all Californians can breathe clean air. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide comments.
Thank you, Jen.
Our next question or comment is from Bob Shepard. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Hi, Bob Shepard with Quinn, also for the Caterpillar dealers. I have a few statements and a few comments. We still believe a phase out cap needs to be looked at, especially for very large fleets. I can tell you for Quinn specifically, in one particular year, we're going to have 55 forklifts come up due. And so that's really way more than anybody wants to budget in anything, even if they have a few years in gap. So I think we still need to discuss this phase out cap as to how it affects large fleets. On the discussion of feasibility, or infeasibility, I guess I should probably say, there are still safety issues, there are incline issues, performance issues having to do with rough terrain and whether or not electric forklift can safely manage that. So this still needs to be discussed. There are going to be situations where you're just not going to be able to put an electric forklift in the application where you are using a propane forklift. And getting to the next part of it having to do with slide 56, I don't know why the statement was you've not had enough feedback. I mean, the construction industry, the Caterpillar dealers, other industries have told you about remote areas. You're talking about forest areas, construction areas, areas that are dirt, or loose gravel, etc. All of those things considered remote areas have to be considered. You can't just say that you haven't had enough information, so you're just not going to do it. I think we need to put that back on the table and discuss. As far as, thank you for the extra 3 years on the class 5 for rental, taking it up to model year 2028. But we also asked on class 4, why wouldn't you allow that? And from a business decision, we understand we're going to have less time for that forklift. We're still going to have a 2038 or 2040 35, I guess it is, deadline for that. But why wouldn't you still allow us to have the latest and greatest technology in our rental fleets? Again, I go back to the whole thing about an Avis or a Budget or one of those national car rentals. They're going to have the latest and greatest for you so that you aren't going to fall dead out on the highway or so having the latest technology is very important in the rental industry to supply to their customers. So I encourage you to have both Class 4 and Class 5 go out till the 2028 model year. Again, that's a business decision that we have to say, do we want to buy that and only have a few years of use here and then have to turn around and sell it? That really is a business decision. It would be more apt that you put the use of good forklifts out there still out until 2028. The other thing that I kind of thought was strange when you said taking a unit out of service, and now you're having to pull the seat out, the battery out, and a whole bunch of other things, a propane tank. It just doesn't make any sense that you're going to dismantle this whole thing while you're waiting to sell it and then have to put it all back together. I would suggest that you just concentrate maybe on the propane tank being removed, the battery. I guess you could probably remove the battery, but the seat, I mean, again, the steering wheel, you're going to end up having to put it all back together to sell it. Just makes no sense. I think that probably covers the points that I wanted to lay out today.
Okay, Bob, you asked a lot of questions, or you made a lot of comments. Let's see if I could, if I got all of them. Okay, so one thing you mentioned was that, the phase out impact on large fleets, and in your example, I think you had said like 1 year you guys would have to turn over 55 forklifts. So although we've kind of grouped our model years, I mean, the intent is not for you to just take that action during the year of compliance, right before the year of compliance date comes about. The idea is that, the years leading up to it gives you flexibility on how you want to phase out those forklifts ahead of a compliance deadline. So it's not like we're not really expecting fleets just to not do anything, even though there isn't a specific compliance date, a compliance deadline during that year. And so if you did have 55, let's say that first compliance date that you have turnover, what we're really expecting from a fleet is to spread that out among like the 2 or 3 years ahead of that compliance deadline. And so that was like the first question. The second question, you were saying, there are certain applications where zero emission is just not feasible. And you had mentioned rough terrain. So I think we already know, I think maybe when you say rough terrain, you're not talking about a rough terrain forklift, but rough terrain forklifts are excluded from the regulation. And so if you're just saying maybe there are rougher surfaces that a class 5 work on, like even if we believe zero emission technology is feasible, right? In almost every application. If there are certain specific situations where, okay, well, I think the one example is you said towing, and if there isn't a zero emission option that can do towing today, I mean, we think that the rule is structured so that issues like that can be resolved, over the course of the phase out, especially with like the options to be able to rent LSI forklifts while you're trying to kind of figure things out. Remote work sites. So we've heard, I guess, many times that we need to address remote work. Well, not many times, but we have heard we need to address remote work sites, but we're not getting answers for like the questions we have. It's like, it's like, how would you define a remote work site? Like how long do forklifts typically operate at a remote work site, right? Like if you're going to just take a forklift out to a remote work site, use it for the day and take it home, then, then there really isn't a need for an exemption there, an extension there, right? I mean, it's like, but if, it's like, give us the examples of fleets that are just at remote work sites for long periods of time. And there's no options. There are also, nowadays, there's a lot of manufacturers producing these portable, charging carts, I guess, or, they can pull out this mobile charging unit out to a site to support forklifts or just any electric electrical equipment. So there are options. And then it's like on these remote work sites, are they using diesels or propane today? I mean, these are kind of like the questions we need to kind of we need answers before we kind of decide whether we need to actually make a carve out there or not. And so these are kind of the questions we haven't really received, at least we haven't received a lot of information on. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, it's just based on kind of what we're hearing. Maybe it's not as big of a concern as we've been hearing. But if you feel differently, definitely continue to talk to us about that, provide. But, what we're really asking for is like examples, like real examples of operations that just have these huge challenges and wouldn't be able to go zero. And so we are open to kind of continuing discussions on those. You also had a question of like why we're not allowing the purchase of newer class 4s to kind of continue to kind of feed the rental market. And we believe in the class 4 space, zero emission technology is definitely much more mature than the class 5 space. So one of the reasons why we want to kind of support this class 4 rental market is because we realize that the forklifts may be able to do the work, but there might be operational challenges that have to be kind of worked through the phase out. And so having kind of that quote unquote crutch there kind of helps like fleets kind of work through those issues and still be able to operate while they're trying to figure out how to make zero emission technology work for them. And it's much more critical. There's less known about the zero emission class 5s, right? And transitioning there than there is on the class 4s. The class 4s have been using those class 4 zero emission replacements have been used for decades. Whereas on the class 5s, it's relatively nascent. And we realize that there might be some more challenges trying to kind of integrate those into the operation. And so really, we want to make sure that we're supporting that class 5s, but the class 4s, we just, at least at this point, don't really think it's that it's really necessary to allow that. Thank you for your comments on the forklift waiting sale or scrap or relocation. That was something we just kind of we heard concerns about it, and then we put together some proposed language. But definitely, we're seeking comment on that, and appreciate the comments you provided. Thank you.
Can I a couple of rebuttal comments?
Sure.
Okay, so one of the things that's concerned me both in this and the ACF is, don't worry, industry will catch up and do it for you. And that's the concern I have with where things are definitely infeasible or an unsafe situation. Again, I go back to OSHA regulations because there's some very specific requirements within their lift truck requirements. So there has to be something in this regulation that allows for concerns with, hey, this just isn't feasible. Here's the reasons why. I mean, getting into legal matters. So the arbitration or something that has to be into this regulation that allows for this kind of a discussion. You asked about remote sites and not hearing enough on that. When a propane forklift goes out onto a construction site, it doesn't just get dropped there and taken back, the same day to go and recharge. And again, hardwire is required for these charging stations. You just don't have that set up on construction sites. So they're not going to go on today, off today to get charged, recharged, and brought back out again the next day. They're dropped for several months. So we do need to have more discussion about remote areas and like the rough terrain. I've given that definition. Again, you're talking about situations where it's just you take an electric in there and you're going to be unsafe. And again, the incline thing comes into operations. The final thing I'd say on the class 4 rentals, keep in mind, as people are phasing out their forklifts, they need a replacement forklift temporarily while they are getting one of those repaired that is still legal to operate. It's not required to be phased out, but it had an engine problem. So then they rent something from us. Well, if all of a sudden we're starting to get completely phased out of all of our rental class 4s, now we don't have an opportunity to be able to still allow that person to rent and while they're repairing. So this is the other reason why we're asking for the class 4 for rental companies to still be available so that people can manage their business and not just shut down their business because they can't have their forklift went down. They don't have any ability to rent.
Okay, well, I think we can probably talk more about your concerns offline, but just high level kind of response to like the feasibility stuff. And we understand that well, at least what we've heard is there are situations that zero emission may not be a feasible like direct replacement today. But, again, we try to structure the rule where there's like some time for that stuff to happen, like without actually putting an explicit feasibility like extension in there. That just really causes more work for everybody. I mean, fleets would have to apply for it, and then we'd have to like review it and evaluate and approve or disapprove it. Our preference was to kind of create a program that has like some built-in flexibility, so that the stakeholders, the regulated community has time to kind of figure those things out without having to kind of go through this formal process. And the rule is meant to kind of push things too, right? It's like the intent of the rule is to accelerate the transition of zero emission forklifts. It's not to just let it happen organically. So it's definitely there to apply pressure to everybody kind of involved. And so yeah, on the class 4 thing, I think we can continue to talk about it, but I don't know, we'll have to maybe kind of run through some scenarios or something. But I just think that right now it's like you will have class 4 forklifts available, and fleets will be transitioning to zero, like you said, and it's like if a forklift goes down, why can't they rent a zero emission forklift to replace it for that period of time? I mean, these are kind of the questions in my mind, at least at this point. We can continue to talk about those.
Again, a rental of an electric requires hard wire. So when you have something go down and needing repair, you can't just throw an electric out there.
Well, I mean, the expectation is that fleets would be transitioning to electrics anyways, or zero emission forklifts anyway, right? So they will have wiring in place, unless you're talking about something else that I'm not understanding.
Okay.
Well, like I said, Bob, reach out to us after. We can continue these conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, next we have a question I'm going to do one more question and then we're going to move back to type questions from Priscilla Rodriguez. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me? Good morning.
Hi, Priscilla. Yes, we can.
Great, thank you, David. Priscilla Rodriguez. I am with Western Agricultural Processors Association and California Cotton Ginners and Growers Association. I want to speak specifically to the state's current infrastructure. We all, after we've gone through various meetings with utility companies, we know that the current state's infrastructure is ill prepared to take on the expected demand of the conversion of propane forklifts to electric. Not only is the state's infrastructure not prepared for the increased load on the system with forks, trucks, and other regulations coming along the way, it currently severely lacks the ability to meet today's needs. We recently provided CARB an example of a simple ag shop waiting to be connected to service, and it has been 6 years since the initial application and yet still no service. While simple connections like the one I just gave can take an erroneous amount of time, we still need to consider areas where significant upgrades will need to be taken, such as substation upgrades, and that can take upward of 13 years or more to complete. There will be a significant number of substations in rural areas that will undoubtedly require upgrades. How can we possibly meet this role with a cap on a 5-year extension delay? From the example above on the ag shop, placing a 5-year timeline limit will not only result in our members being out of compliance, but will result in our members being out of compliance and responsible for the utility's inability to meet the timeline and extension delays. These issues, infrastructure issues, are exacerbated in rural areas, and special consideration should be taken into account for ag operations in those rural areas. But no, the lack of infrastructure is truly a statewide systemic problem and is also a problem for urban areas. Without a resolution to the state's infrastructure, this is a plan for disaster when facilities are relying solely on a system that is inadequate, and additional consideration needs to be given to the 5-year total delay extension. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments.
Thank you, Priscilla. As you know, we are we are kind of working through just the extension provisions as well. Like internally, we're considering the different things, and we presented kind of what the ACF proposal has right now. But we definitely have heard from you and other stakeholders that there are potentially unique challenges out there that we may need to address in the zero-emission forklift rule, and just know what we're willing to continue to kind of work with you and other stakeholders on refining kind of our proposal for the infrastructure extensions. Thank you. Kim, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, if I can unmute myself. Yeah, no, and I would just say, Priscilla, really appreciate you stating all that, and want to encourage folks to continue bringing this up. Like, we're trying to find a path forward and meet the goals set out in EO 7920, but the infrastructure issues are real. And I think it's important for not just my rulemaking team here to hear those, but for our board members and our our leadership to keep hearing this. So really appreciate you speaking today, Priscilla, and encourage you to speak in other forums on that as well.
Thank you, and we look forward to working with you on this. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Linus Farias regarding infrastructure delay for an entity that has multiple statewide locations. If the utility infrastructure delays impact vary depending on the utility and or location, how can a large fleet assure compliance? Keith?
Yes, we will allow large fleets to go by location. If, for example, if they can get one location to be in full compliance, they can get that one in and then submit a delay request for the other locations that they cannot get in. And again, we expect them to add as many zero-emission forklifts as they can with the current utilities that are on site. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Keith. Mark Cuesta asks, for the tactical support equipment exemption, would the definition in the portable ATCM be updated to include forklifts as an example? Not all forklifts on a military installation would fall into this exemption, and sounds like it will be captured in the annual LSI reporting. David?
Okay, hi, thanks for the question, Mark. I'm a little bit confused by the question, but I don't know about the definition of the portable ATCM, and we're not planning to make any amendments to that regulation in our rulemaking effort. But I guess I'll have to go take a look, and if you have any clarifications you want to add to the question, please, type it in the chat or raise your hand and we can talk about it. Thank you, Mark.
And Scott Edom asks, is there no consideration for an annual hours of usage threshold for the affected fork trucks? And I believe, Scott, you probably typed this in before that slide came up. I believe it's 2013 to 2025 model years that affected forklifts that operate for less than or equal to 200 hours. David? Is that right?
Well, I'll let Keith take this.
Yeah, for a micro business, they get it permanently. For a small fleet or a large fleet, they will be able to use them up to 2030, and then that'll be phased out for, again, it'll be 200 hours of annual usage or less. So so there is a little bit of time there. Then beyond that, for large fleets and small fleets, no, they will be required to they will not be able to have a low use forklift.
Yeah, so it would be temporary available to non-micro businesses from until January 1st, 2031. And then after that, then that exemption goes away, except for micro businesses that could keep one.
Thank you both. Kayla Kokila asks, if you have a propane forklift that is used to tow large parts outside between buildings on trailers, sometimes going up and down hills, would this qualify for a non-feasibility exemption?
So yeah, we don't actually have a feasibility exemption in the rule right now, but we have heard about this, about fleets using forklifts to tow. And I guess this is one of those things where we think that fleets can work with manufacturers to resolve during the phase out period. But like I said, if you want to talk about it in more detail, feel free to contact us after the workshop. Thank you.
Terrence Yang is asking, how could I request government financial aid for the new electric class 5 cushion tire forklift? Will the government support this issue? As far as the Carl Moyer program, I definitely suggest you reach out to your local air district and discuss with them. Daniel Langmaid over at Bay Area AQMD was an earlier speaker as well that encouraged you to reach out to their district if that's the district you fall upon.
Hi, Terrence. Maybe if I think we have his contact information, right? Maybe we can send some information. But yeah, there are various incentive programs out there. I mean, I don't know all of them, but Holmes just mentioned, Moyer is an option. You can apply through the districts to access Carl Moyer funding. We also have like the clean off-road. It was one of the slides, clean off-road equipment voucher incentive project, which is basically managed here by the state. And that funds forklifts of 8,000 pounds lift capacity or greater. So, I don't know what size forklifts you're talking about there, but that program currently exists. And there are probably other ones out there too, like the, what's that one? The VW mitigation funds, I think also has a program that funds forklifts. The low carbon fuel standard currently provides credit for zero emission forklift use, which can be monetized if you sell the credits. Also, the federal government recently in their Inflation Reduction Act, I believe, gives some type of tax rebate or tax credit for purchasing zero emission vehicles or equipment. Like I said, that's not an exhaustive list, but those are things, kind of just a few things on the top of my mind. If you want to, maybe I can have someone send you some information of at least programs that the state administers after the workshop. But thank you, Terrence.
Take a couple more here. We've got Linus Farias regarding the infrastructure delay. If the utility is unable to supply timely infrastructure, how will the delay be extended if beyond 2 years?
I guess I can take that one. Unless, oh, Keith just grabbed it. Keith, you want to answer? You're on mute.
I tried to answer this a little earlier, and I guess I wasn't very clear. So David, if you want to chime in after I'm done, maybe you can help clarify it a little bit. But our infrastructure delay is for up to 5 years. So there's a 3-year initial and then a 2-year additional if you need it. And that would be on top of your compliance date. And if you add that to, say, for example, our original compliance dates were 2016. So now you go to 2028, plus you add that 5 years on top of that 2028. You're ending up with 8 years more time to get your infrastructure in. So hopefully that will be enough for the utilities to get the infrastructure in for you.
And I'll just kind of mention, like, you should be talking to your utility as soon as possible. I wouldn't wait till, a year or two before the compliance date, your first compliance date. You should be, talking to your utility. I mean, today, if not today, then, before 2026, to start planning and getting that stuff, getting the infrastructure upgrade, getting that process and going, so that it will be ready when you need to deploy the forklifts.
And I'll just add that, for sort of simplicity and sort of consistent policy setting, we're trying to track closely what the Advanced Clean Fleets is doing, that rulemaking team is doing with respect to this same issue, and trying to align with them. However, if folks think that there are needs for this to extend longer, possibly for forklifts than for trucks, we definitely welcome that input. And I already heard, I think Priscilla was pointing out some reasons she believes that's the case. So definitely want to hear from folks if they think that.
Okay. I'm going to sum up a couple of comments that were received in by saying that for those folks who have expressed some concerns about the equipment that's available, zero emission equipment that's available, we do have a lot of dealers that would like to connect with you. So for example, Shane Seaver with the metals industry, you mentioned you had some concerns. We do have some dealers that would like to connect with you. So suggest you guys, we'll do whatever we can to help connect you guys. But Jason Anderson had a comment: a challenge for facilities that operate 24/7 is the time required to recharge batteries is not acceptable and not conducive to keeping fleets operational. And then Joe Campbell, I think we'll end with you here before we go back to the raised hands. What about low use exemptions? And I think Keith just answered that again. So if that's still an open question for you, please just let me know and we'll try to provide additional clarity. If you'd like to go back to raised hands.
Sure. So we have a raised hand from Bill McGavern. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Thanks very much. Bill McGavern with the Coalition for Clean Air. And it's great to see this rulemaking moving forwards. It was at one point scheduled to go to the board in 2020. So I'm glad that we're looking at doing it this year. And we definitely agree that we need to make a transition to zero emission forklifts. And unfortunately, we have a lot of models that are available. We need to clean up every part of the goods movement sector to reduce the air pollution burden that so many Californians are living with. I share the questions raised by Regina Sue from Earth Justice about some of the changes that are being made in the proposal and whether they might cost us any emission reductions, but also appreciated the response by Kim in terms of the rationale for why those changes were made. And I did want to specifically address one of the questions you raised today and to say that, yes, the rulemaking should expand its scope to include the forklifts with a capacity of over 12,000 pounds, since there are already dozens of models of those forklifts that are certified and are being subsidized by core vouchers. Then yes, we should expand the scope of the rulemaking in order to capture the emission reductions from these larger forklifts. Thanks very much.
Okay, next we have a question from David Worthington. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Thank you. My name is David Worthington. I'm with the County of Santa Clara. We operate a large fleet in California. I've been working with ACF and the ACT regulation previously, and infrastructure is the challenge for all of us. ACF regulation alone is going to take up all the available capacity at every fleet location in California and warehouse without taking into impacts that the charging infrastructure is needed for forklifts. We are been working with our local utility providers. I've talked to utility providers up and down the state because of the lack of CARB being able to supply the advanced clean trucks regulatory data that we've provided from individual fleets, private government in California about our capacity needs. Utility providers have no idea how big of a challenge this is. So just because we think we can have infrastructure in place in 3 to 5 years, it's unrealistic based on what the utility providers are telling us. Also, most of the utility providers require a request for service to be made at a particular site before they will tell you how much grid capacity is available. The grid capacity is also on a first come, first served basis. So even if you plan for grid capacity to support the forklifts, if another fleet or another warehouse nearby takes up that grid capacity, it changes your timelines radically. I'll give you a very quick example. We've done recent site visits of 11 different locations. Of those 11 different locations, 2 of them we do not have grid capacity for. And that's just a small sampling of our own requirements for the ACF. It is very common that there is not grid capacity in the local utility providers until they understand what capacity demands are from ACF. They can't tell us if they'll be able to upgrade local or regional grid capacity for anywhere from 7 to 10 years. So we really need the regulation to be written in such a way that we have exemptions, ongoing exemptions, when grid capacity is not available. And depending on ACF to be the guiding regulation for exemptions for grid capacity is not going to help out the forklift industry. Because again, ACF just being in compliant with that regulation will take up all the available grid capacity in California. Thank you.
Okay, so that resolves all our outstanding raised hand questions. If anyone else had a live question, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll go back to written questions.
Thank you, Marjorie. Melody Black asks, are you planning any, actually, we already answered that one. Sorry. This question is from Scott Edom. Is there no consideration for an annual hours of usage threshold for the affected fork trucks? Keith?
There is not, unless you consider low use for micro businesses. Then they get the 200 hours. But other than that, that's it. And I should say for small and large businesses until 2031.
Okay, Alejandro asks, is there an exception or consideration for micro fleets of 3 or 5 forklifts? And I believe the answer to that is no, there is not at this time. Maria Viramontes asks, will this rule be in a ballot to vote against or in favor? Or is CARB just coming up with rules on their own? Kim?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for the question. Maybe I can explain the process here. So for the past couple years now, we've been doing workshops and gathering information and visiting fleets and talking to manufacturers, all sort of getting ready to get staff's proposal put together. And what we do when we have a proposal ready is we put together a initial statement of reasons and a public notice. And we that goes out 45 days ahead of an official meeting of the California Air Resources Board. And then we go to that hearing and we present to the board, this is you know, here's what we're doing, here's why, this is staff's proposal, and then the board, which is made up of appointees by the governor, votes up or down on that. And they can just accept exactly what we propose, or they can vote down, or they could say, well, this looks fine, but go back and deal with this issue or that issue. And if that happens, then we get sent back to do what are called 15-day changes, which is when we'd like make minor amendments and release those for 15 days for people to take a look at and comment on. And so we really welcome folks' input now, but this is also this informal learning process together. Once we have an official proposal out, then there's an official 45-day comment period where people can submit comments, and then those comments can all be read and considered by our board members who are like the official decision makers on this. And then folks are also welcome to come in person or virtually and testify at that hearing as well. So that's kind of how the decision-making process works.
Thank you, Kim. Gary Ma asks a process question regarding low use designation. Is there a deadline to designate a LSI forklift as low use, or can an LSI forklift be designated at any time prior to the low use sunset date?
There's no deadline, although as Keith Roderick explained, the low use is only allowed up to a certain date. So other than for the smallest fleets, it's only through December 31st, 2030. But it's not like you have to tell us today if, you know, 7 years from now, you're going to have a low use forklift.
Thank you, Kim. And Bruce Isef's and Bob Shepard's questions are going to be combined here. How will this work with the current LSI program? And does the LSI regulation sunset upon adoption of this regulation?
Okay. I noticed, Keith, that you said you were going to answer Bob's, but maybe I'll just answer both together. So we're still looking at kind of what we need to do with the LSI rule, what specific amendments we need to make sure these kind of line up not seamlessly. But I mean, that rule is fully implemented, as I understand. So I mean, I think the only thing we need to kind of worry about is if somehow going zero emission is going to allow fleets to buy dirtier forklifts, but I'm not sure that's really going to happen. But I don't think that's going to happen. But administratively, I think we need to figure out like just what language changes we have to make to make the connection of the rules to kind of seamless. So something we plan to look into. Thank you, Bruce and Bob.
David, I think when you said forklifts, I think you mean other equipment, other LSI equipment other than forklifts, right?
Well, I mean, for our pieces, the forklifts, but yeah, I guess the other pieces will, the other elements of the rule would still remain in effect for the other equipment.
Okay, Gary Cross asks a related question. For this regulation and LSI fleet regulation, will all forklifts end up with a label showing an EIN number?
Yeah, so we're really trying to kind of reduce the labeling in this proposal. Right now, labeling would be required for low use. It would be required for dedicated emergency forklifts, but in all other cases, I don't believe a label is required. But yes, that is something I guess we need to look into for the LSI regulation. I think, the LSI regulation actually sunsets, the reporting and labeling both sunset, I think, in June of this year. So I think that answers this question. Thank you, Gary.
All right, Joey Giordano asks on slide 44, will the reporting be done indoors through the existing large spark ignition regulation? It would be great not to have to register for yet another compliance website within the same regulatory entity. CARB already has doors, truckers, R3, etc. I know they are for separate programs, but this seems to fit in nicely with what already exists indoors.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, that's definitely our thinking as well. And in fact, not only the in-use off-road reg, but also the current LSI reg report into doors. And so our intention is to have any reporting required as part of this regulation also flow into doors. So there wouldn't be like a separate system.
Thank you for that. Paul Britton asks, what plans are there for subsidy programs for the installation of diesel tanks and pumps for those entities that, due to situational aspects, are not a candidate for zero-emission forklifts, but instead will need to change from LP to diesel-fueled fleets? Kim.
Yeah, there's no such plans. And obviously, that compliance response is what we're trying to avoid. Like, it would be really unfortunate if a lot of fleets chose, as a result of this regulation, to switch to diesel instead of switching to zero emission. And so we're trying to set up the timing of the requirements and the exemptions and extensions such that fleets' behavior is to gradually phase out their spark ignition forklifts and shift over to zero emission forklifts. So where there are situations where people are hearing this and thinking, well, what I think people would actually do is switch to diesel, then please, give us feedback on that. We don't think diesel is feasible inside warehouses, for example, so we're not so worried about it there. But for outdoor applications, we are more worried about it, and that's part of the reason why we have later dates for Class 5 forklifts proposed. But we've heard some comments here today about like remote locations or towing or situations like that where people might be thinking, if I had to get rid of my spark ignition, I would just go to diesel. So please just let us know if there's any situations like that that you think we're not aware of. Thank you.
Yeah. Spencer Adams has a statement. Rated capacity issue is a very big concern, but Kim, it looks like you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up. I don't really understand what do you mean. So if Spencer Adams could raise his hand and explain what's the concern, that would be helpful.
We'll give you some time on that, Spencer. Daniel Langmaid asks, depending on the forklift application, sometimes the lift capacity information has been worn off or is missing. Presumably, you're asking how you would address that kind of a situation. Heath, if you'd like to answer that.
Sorry about that. Got myself muted. Yes, well, it's our understanding that OSHA requires that the lift capacity information be legible at all times. So they'd be in violation of OSHA rules. And we also have a requirement in the reg that requires them to keep it legible. So they'd be in violation of our regulation also. We can't prevent manufacturer or users of forklifts, fleet operators, that is, to, keep their labels intact other than what we could put on a reg. So we tried to address it in the reg that way.
And I do believe we would encourage you to reach out to your dealer. Perhaps you can have a new plate issued and installed. David Worthington asks, will there be the ability for additional extensions beyond the 5 years where local and regional electrical grid capacity will not be in place for 7 years or longer? This is a recurring theme here, but David, if you'd like to address this again.
So I think he might have put this in the Q&A before he actually raised his hand, but yes, right now the reg, as the reg concept would only allow a maximum of 5 years for a utility issues for utility site electrification issues. But we did hear your comments that these upgrades can take 7 to 10 years. So thank you for that.
All right, and Michael Martzall is sharing a couple of points here. Lithium ion batteries, if charged at breaks and in between shifts, will handle 3 shifts. He also states ANSI ITS DF BF B56.1 2020 OSHA clearly states that safety standards and ID plate requirements, load centers, rated capacity, and equipment are required. Do we have
I could take it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we have a question or comment from Melody Black. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name, affiliation, and make your question or comment.
Sure. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Melody Black. I'm with Southern California Edison, and I did want to comment with regards to the site electrification exemption. First, to thank staff for incorporating the site electrification extension into the regulation. I did want to make clear, however, that while we appreciate the 5-year extension and our plans are to do what we can to support providing power in a timely manner to our customers, because that's what we do. We do recognize there may be some instances where capacity is not available, and it will take beyond 5 years for us to get that capacity to the site location. Hopefully there's few of those, but we can't make a guarantee that we'll be able to get a site energized within a 5-year time period. It's going to be based upon the site, all the requirements at that location, and what we need to do to update our infrastructure. So within the advanced clean fleets regulation, we did comment and ask CARB staff to incorporate an allowance for the executive officer to have the flexibility to extend the site electrification beyond that when needed and identified by the utility for those unique situations. And we would request that in the zero emission forklift ruling that you consider something similar. Thank you.
Thank you, Melody. Would that be something that you'd be able to put in writing for us, just so we have a letter we could share around with other decision makers here?
Yes, we can absolutely do that for you.
I'd really appreciate that, and I'd reiterate the same request for Priscilla and others that have commented on the need for longer possible extensions on the infrastructure issue. Thanks so much.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up, Melody, if you're still there?
Yes.
So this is more like a technical question. So is there some type of like criteria or criterion or something that triggers like something to take longer, like over 5 years? Is there some specific situational thing that we could use in terms of the decision making to allow more than 5 years or less than 5 years?
I mean, that's really hard to say. I don't know that we can give you some specific language on, that it's always going to happen in this situation, because we may have additional capacity that's needed that we're able to address within the 5-year time period. And to the extent that we can work with a customer to phase in their power needs. So for example, we might be able to provide power that would support chargers for 4 forklifts, but if they need 50 all at once, well, that may be more difficult. Or if we need to build a substation, that may take longer. So it really is site specific. And we had a similar challenge with ACF. We can't necessarily provide, set black and white guidelines on this is always going to go beyond. So that's why we were asking for flexibility in those types of situations. Again, our plan is to work closely with our customers to get them the power they need when they need it and in a timely fashion. But we are just aware there are going to be those situations on the borders that may require more time. And so to the extent CARB can be flexible with us and the fleets, we would appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Melody.
Okay, we have Spencer Adams. I have unmuted your mic. Please state your name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Spencer Adams. I'm with Heister Yale Group, an OEM manufacturer of forklifts. I was addressing the comment before about rated capacity, and the issue I'm highlighting is one that I believe you're in conversations with the Industrial Truck Association about, regarding the difference between rated capacity and capacity, as those are defined in B56.1, and what goes on a nameplate for a forklift, as well as the derated capacity of the forklift. And the concern is that if you have a 12,000 pound limitation or segmentation that's based on a capacity rating that's listed on the forklift itself, it becomes untenable to determine what's going to happen on the manufacturer's end, because the rating in the field as derated by the equipment put on the truck, for example, the mast, the attachment that's in question, the load center, all changes that, and you can have a 15,000 pound rated forklift that now drops below the 12,000 pound capacity rating, just dependent on what happens in the field and what changes are made to that forklift. So my point is that I think you should strongly consider the ITA's recommendations on this and not base it on the derated capacity of a forklift, because it becomes completely unfeasible to manage that when you're talking about forklift configurations that can change in the field after they get installed.
So I have I guess a follow-up. So one of the questions I've had is like, okay, so if we use the lift capacity on the spec sheet, like how is that determined?
That's determined by, and Gary Cross is in line with this. And you can follow up with him as well later, but the spec sheet lists from the manufacturer's perspective, the standard base capacity of that forklift model series, as determined pursuant to the B56.1 capacity rating tests.
So I think that was like my main question is like, does the base capacity follow B56.1? And then like, so is it, because what I've noticed is that you'll have a base capacity listed on the spec sheet, but I don't know if, like what the load center is. I don't know. I know it's like the max capacity of that actual series, right? But the thing is that how was that determined is not clear.
Yeah,
at least to me.
And I'd encourage you to follow up with Gary and myself and others on that. We can explain in more detail. And I know that he was going to gather spec sheets from across the industry to show to you. But the big problem comes in when we say the actual capacity that's on the nameplate, because in the field you will have nameplates that get changed multiple times because of a user will go from just forks to a side shift attachment to a clamp of some sort, and those will completely change the rating of the truck. And you go from one truck that previously, when it came out of the factory, didn't fit within or was above the 12,000 pound capacity rating. Now in the field, it's going to change just because of the change in the field. So that's our concern. It seems really untenable to manage it by stating or to regulate it just by what's listed on the actual nameplate itself, which is the D-rated capacity, I will acknowledge this in B56.1, the definitions as far as capacity and rated capacity seem backwards in what most people's minds they are, but everyone has access to the spec sheets for the truck capacities. Manufacturers all make those available. And those are based on the same standard test about what is, in fact, the full base model capacity for that truck out of the factory.
Okay, thank you, Spencer. We'll follow up with you after you and the ITA as well. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have no more raised hand questions.
Okay, we have Sandy Holpsapple. If the proposed rule is going to board consideration in September 2023, when is the rule going to be finalized and in place? Kim?
Okay, this perfect follow-up to the process I was describing before. So what happens is, so it goes before the board in September and the board approves it. So then there's a 1-year clock that we have that starts on the date we put out the public notice. The public notice goes out like 45 days ahead of the board hearing. So that would be early August. So early August, we put out this public notice, and within a year of that date, so by early August of 2024, we have to get the whole final package sent to the Office of Administrative Law. So that includes like any 15-day changes we do. It includes like a final statement of reason. regulations and the reg order, everything all kind of wrapped up and done. And then when the Office of Administrative Law acts, then the actual regulation becomes effective. And I think they get like 30 days. Once we send it to them, they get like 30 days to say, yep, this looks okay. So that's when it would actually be in the California Code of Regulations and officially in effect. And then, of course, after that, there's the whole phase in that that Lori walked through for when it would take effect for certain model years.
Thank you for that. Melody Black asks, is the low use exemption still available for all forklifts fleets prior to 2031? I see that the exemption sunsets in 2031, but I'm not clear if it's phasing out for fleets or certain forklift types prior to that time.
Okay, on the low use exemption, it will be phasing out for large and small fleets, and the micro businesses can keep one low use forklift indefinitely, the way the break is currently written. So hopefully that answers your question, Melody.
And let me add one bit. So one thing that we've been thinking about internally is wondering whether really small public fleets might also need that that provision. So if there's any such people that work for small public agencies that think they might have a need kind of long-term to keep one low-use spark ignition forklift around, it'd be great if we could hear from you.
All right, we have a question from M. Moravik. In regards to remote worksite exemption question on slide 56, it is common that on all new construction sites that there are many subcontractors' scope of work that are completed before utilities are supplied to the job site. It is not a utility delay to the project, but the way building is constructed. Is there any thought to how a company would work through this? David?
I was muted, sorry. Thank you for that question. So I guess like that's kind of what we've been hearing. And so is there a specific milestone, I guess, in the construction process that we can use as a decision point? I mean, we still think, you know, zero emission eventually will be in a place where it can be used even in those situations with like these other like mobile charging solutions and such. But, you know, definitely kind of near term, like if this is, we've been hearing that this is like the case where, you know, the construction site obviously won't have power in the beginning while they're, you know, grading and stuff like that. But is there a specific milestone or decision point that we could use to you know, to make decisions on like potentially giving an extension or something? I don't know if you can kind of reach out to us after the workshop and kind of let us know. And we could talk about it. Thank you.
All right, Spencer Adams is sharing that there are certain class 4 trucks where there is no viable lithium ion option available. Next question, Mark Cello. Following up on certification aspect for zero emission forklifts, to my knowledge, CARB does not have any mechanism in place for certification of ZEFs. As you may know, the on-road BEV categories require certification before introduction into commerce in California. Why is there no consideration for certification of zero emission forklifts? Without fully getting via certification pathway and forcing this technology, without fully vetting and forcing this technology into the marketplace, how can we ensure these products will actually be efficient and reliable? What about companies that may use cheaper batteries, which may or may not be efficient or reliable? Without some type of quality assurance requirements like certification, it is very likely that we will create a non-welcoming space in our environment to include landfills with cheap, non-reliable batteries that have simply been tossed out. Kim.
So yeah, thank you so much for that. One thing that we're thinking about is, right, the whole sort of purpose of this rulemaking is to try to facilitate the transition to zero emission forklifts. And we know there's an additional purchase price. They're more expensive than than traditional spark ignition forklifts. And so the more costs that we impose on manufacturers of such forklifts, the more expensive they may be, and like the more costs for this regulation may impose on people. So we've been trying to just think through really carefully any requirements that we're putting on zero emission forklift manufacturers. And so that's why we're asking, like, what are the pros and cons of requiring certification? And so we've heard one district staff person say, well, it could be helpful for incentive programs to have CARB require zero emission forklift certification. And then really appreciate your comment here where you're saying you would appreciate zero emission forklift certification if it could ensure that such forklifts are more efficient and reliable, maybe have well functioning batteries. So thanks for the input.
Thank you, Kim. Spencer Adams makes a statement that the removal of the seat and steering wheel introduces safety hazards and reassembly of safety critical components. So thank you for that feedback. Colby Morrow is looking for a comment log. I looked online for the comment log and was unable to find anything for this rulemaking. Appreciate it if you could share the link where all the comments have been submitted. Kim, did you want to make a?
Yeah, let me just, this is another process question. So the official comment log doesn't open until we actually publish an official staff proposal, like at the start of that 45-day comment period that I was talking about. So we'd anticipate that would happen probably early August. Up to now, if you want to look at the history of what we've been talking about, you can take a look at our webpage and you can see all of our workshops and work groups and recordings of them. So that's the only record we have of sort of the informal discussions that we've had so far.
Thank you for that. We've repeatedly, this is from Colin Suarez. We have repeatedly heard the comment, this technology is feasible, but staff have continued to ignore the significant costs to operators and renters and identify select solutions with higher costs, such as lithium-ion battery forklifts. Does CARB staff plan to update their cost modeling to defend this argument?
So, yeah, I'll take this one. So thank you, Colin. So in terms of like the macroeconomic impacts, that will be included in our standardized regulatory impact assessment that's going to be submitted to DOF in Department of Finance in April of this year. It will be published in April of this year. So that covers kind of like the macroeconomic costs impact of this regulation. So overall, you know, this regulation actually saves, at least what we believe it saves money based on, you know, fuel savings, maintenance savings, and at least at this point, the availability of low carbon fuel standard credits. But this is also kind of dependent. We recognize this is dependent on like how much a forklift is operated as well, what forklifts they buy. Do they buy used, new, lithium-ion, lead acid? So what we plan to do in our staff report is to kind of just create some scenarios, like examples of different sensitivity analyses for different situations, to kind of illustrate how this could impact different fleets in different situations. Of course, it's not going to cover everything, but we're going to do our best to most accurately as possible, as practicable, you know, the cost of this regulation on fleets. Is there anything else and the team wants to add to that? Okay. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, David. Augie Venencia states, just to piggyback on what Priscilla Rodriguez said about infrastructure deficiencies, where does the state expect to get all the additional electricity to take the place of propane, diesel, gasoline, let alone throw in natural gas?
Guess I'll answer that one to the best of my ability. So, I mean, we're not infrastructure experts here, but we do understand there will be potential infrastructure challenges, and we're trying our best to structure our rule to account for those things. You know, we have confidence that eventually, you know, everything will be there enough to support all these vehicles and equipment. But, you know, in terms of the near-term challenges, I mean, like I said, we recognize that there are these issues out there, and, you know, like I said, you know, we're trying to craft that language to address those. And, you know, if you have comments and feedback on how we're doing that, that's kind of what we're looking for. Thank you.
I also think we have groups that are working with the CEC and the CPUC to resolve some of these issues and make sure things are in place. You know, power plants get built or offshore wind. So, you know, the state as a whole is working on resolving these issues.
Thank you, Keith. Good point.
Okay, and thank you everyone for bearing with. We're making progress here, and we really appreciate all the feedback. So, William Winchester, has CARB considered a second tier of low-use forklifts that could stay in the program beyond 2031 if annual use was limited to some lower level, like 50 or 100 hours per year? And Keith, there's another low-use question.
And yeah, we have discussed these before. We still haven't completely thrown them out. There may be a possibility where we may allow a lower level down to 50. It's still something that we're considering. However, it would at some point have to be, you know, it would be limited over time. That is, by 2038, if we did come up with one, they would still have to be phased out completely.
Thank you, Keith. Rudy Prado, in determining fleet size, do you only count affected forklifts owned and based in California, or do you count all affected forklifts, even if based out of state? I think I know the answer to this, but I'll let you go, Kim. You already took it.
I bet you know it's only forklifts operating in California. So yeah, the definition of fleet in the regulatory language says owned or leased and controlled by a common entity and operated within California.
I would have won. Yay. Dylan Houlihan is interested in Melody Black. Who are you representing? I believe Melody was with Southern California Edison, SCE. Melody, if I get that wrong, please feel free to raise your hand, let us know. Greg Gilbert is asking, it's possible that a fleet that cannot or will not shift from LPG lifts to ZEV can and will move to diesel lifts. Since CARB clearly does not want the tax or TACs or criteria pollutants exceeding those of current LSI lifts, would CARB consider for forklift compliance a CARB certified NZEV flexibility option for LPG or LSI lifts? Net zero engines and off-road mobile running on low CI fuels are available now and would likely cost less than either BEV or diesel forklifts. Greg, if you don't work for a government agency with all these acronyms, I'll be very surprised. Kim, if you'd like to take this.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. We're not currently considering that. We're trying to set up the regulations so that we don't end up pushing to diesel. Also, just to make sure folks are aware, there is already the in-use off-road diesel rule. We just amended that rule to make it significantly more stringent. So it's not like diesel forklifts are completely unregulated. There's also broader plans at CARB for overall transition wherever feasible of combustion equipment to zero emission. So there's going to be other rulemakings coming along to be pushing that. So it isn't like if somebody did go to diesel that they're just sort of off the hook forever. But of course, if you guys think we're missing something there, we do welcome, comments and suggestions.
Thank you, Kim. Michael Martzall asks, if the original rated capacity from the manufacturer is altered by a removable attachment, then the ID plate needs to show the reduced rated capacity with the attachment. If the attachment is permanent, then the ID plate needs to show the new rated capacity with the permanent attachment. This typically needs approval and certification from the manufacturer. No question there, just a statement. Heather Fricod, will the cost analysis include the increased utility cost to operators, as well as increased emissions and resulting health effects from power plants to provide the extra electricity? The term zero emission is a bit of a misnomer, as emissions result from providing the electricity. David, if you'd like to take that.
Well, I'll start it, hopefully, if others can help fill in. But yeah, so In terms of like the utility costs, I'm guessing you're speaking about electricity costs, right? Paying for the electricity to fuel. I mean, the cost analysis does include that. So when we're doing our cost analysis, we're basically comparing, operation of a zero emission forklift compared to the operation of an LS, a large spark ignition forklift. And so those are included. In terms of like the emissions from power plants, I don't know if my team can fill in here if I don't have the right answer. Is like, I don't believe we assess that in our rulemaking. It's not as part of that rulemaking of our rulemaking, but there are a lot of efforts in California to continue cleaning up our grid and our power sources. And so not sure if there's anything else to add to that.
I think you pretty much covered it, David. Yeah, the fact of the matter is we are, the grid is getting cleaner because we are using, getting to, basically zero emission generation with solar and wind. But yes, at times, at night, mainly the grid is mainly supplied by fossil. Again, hopefully the wind that is going to be eventually built offshore wind is, could reduce that substantially. So overall, the grid will be getting cleaner over time. So, but no, my understanding is, as David stated also, we did not include, I don't know what you call it, upstream emissions for this analysis.
Thank you, Keith.
But one additional factor to note, though, is that zero emission equipment is more efficient than spark ignition or diesel. So there's some CO2 related reductions there as well.
And I guess I would just add, Heather, we hear you. We appreciate your concern. We have some of the same concerns, and we are actually, the intent of this is try to reduce some of the emissions that are in the neighborhoods where the equipment is operating to. So Colby Morrow, thank you. I am well aware of the CARB materials available online, but a number of commenters today mentioned they have previously submitted comment letters to CARB and other regulations, such as ACF, have public comments available during the informal rule development process. Kim, I think you're going to have to continue this one.
Yeah,
Please.
thanks for the comment. No, we don't generally do that. I'm not sure if the ACF folks did something special there, but no, generally we don't publish anywhere any individual communications that we get ahead of the opening of that official docket.
And our final comment is from Wade Smith. As follow-up to earlier questions, I'm curious why existing zero-emission forklifts in use would be included in future fleet size determinations. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Wade. So, I mean, the size of a fleet, we're using it sort of like a surrogate for the ability of a fleet to transition their forklift. So, so if you have 26 or more forklifts overall, then, we're saying, well, we think you can transition quicker. So that's kind of why they're included. Like it shouldn't, if you have 25 zero emission forklifts and one LSI forklift, I mean, I don't think it makes sense for you to, we don't think a fleet of that size would need the extra time that we're providing for smaller fleets. Thank you.
And that's all the questions we have in the question and answer at this time.
I think we have another one from Heather. Here, Heather Fricod.
Yep. She is at that. I'll be happy to read this one. Thank you guys for the responses. Agreed that centralized power generation is vastly better than individual small engines. Just hoping the upstream effects are considered. Appreciate your time today. Great discussion. Thank you, Heather. That was an excellent way to end this.
Okay, well, this has been really great. I really appreciate all the questions and comments and even those that are, kind of critical. Really appreciate it. And do if especially on infrastructure issues, if folks can put stuff in writing, that does help us sort of spread the word about what the concerns are. Did anyone, before we wrap up, did anyone not get their question answered? Maybe we just give people another minute or two to put a hand up if there's something there.
We have one hand up. Venkata Valetti, I have unmuted your mic. Please state your affiliation and ask your question.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for another great discussion. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes. we can.
Okay. My only question is, we have several discussions happen regarding few topics like rated capacities, engine model, year versus calendar year, remote work site. Based on this, I was wondering if you would have another session workshop made available before the final submissions, because earlier on in the meeting, Kim kind of mentioned that this is the final workshop. So I was wondering if there is a consideration from the agencies that there would be another possibility of another workshop clarifying all of these topics that are still pending. Thank you.
I would say that that wasn't our plan, but if we, maybe if we make some very foundational substantive changes, maybe we could consider that. But I mean, that isn't in the plans right now, and giving the timing of our board hearing, I mean, it would be logistically challenging, but definitely like we'll take your comments and consider them internally. Kim?
And if anyone wants to meet with us, privately, then please, reach out, because we'd be happy to do that. And I did want to follow up too. I think Colby Morrow had suggested like, hey, why aren't you posting informal comments you received? And that isn't something we generally do with rulemakings, but Colby was correct that for the Advanced Clean Fleet rulemaking, they did post some of the comments that came in before the official staff proposal went out. So we haven't done that. We don't plan to do that, but I did want to clarify she was correct on that. Well, whoever set up the timing for this, kudos, because it looks like we finished in exactly the amount of predicted time. So thanks a lot, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.